My name is David Marquet. I commanded a nuclear-powered, fast-attack Los Angeles-class submarine.
My name is Brian Kastner. I'm a former explosive ordnance disposal officer.
My name's Mesa Gifford. Since 2022, I've been fighting alongside Ukraine against Russia as a volunteer.
My name is Jonathan Taylor. In 2011, I took one of the longest sniper shots in Marine Corps history.
My name is Tanner Yackley, also known as Blackjack. I served nearly 10 years in the U.S. Air Force as an MQ-9 Reaper sensor operator. I logged over 3,000 combat hours. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. Being physically separated, 7,500 miles away from the target, you're having to take a life or watch things happen that you have no control over whatsoever. And then you have to go home and deal with dinner and deal with kids' birthdays and deal with anniversaries, and you just watched absolutely horrendous things happen on a screen, and there's no way to escape it. When we're surveilling the targets, usually there's many different things we could be looking for. Sometimes it was just, hey, does this person have a weapon? Is this person trying to plant an IED on the side of the road? Or is this person, trying to pass a note? Or is it a certain individual that we're looking for? It was dependent on what type of target we were on for the day. But most of the time, there was some type of trigger event. Either it could be someone, all right, if they're actively digging, and, we confirm that they have a weapon, and then an IED, then that's enough, to check a box and say, yes, now we can take out that target. Or if all of a sudden they start actively shooting on friendly forces, that was usually enough to go, yes, we can employ on this target. Sometimes it could be that short of just someone says, hey, there's a person shooting a mortar at a base, and we get eyes on, and within 30 seconds, we're pulling the trigger. Because you can see mortar tubes light up like a 4th of July show in infrared. So it's really easy to find an active mortar tube. We don't have any other information. It's just that this is a bad guy. Everything's correlated here. There's other times that we would watch people for days, weeks, months. We had one target at our unit that I think we watched for 6 years before we finally had the opportunity to take them out. Usually when we're tracking patterns of life, it would be things like you'd watch somebody wake up for the day, go feed their goats, go play with their kids, hug their wife, drive their family somewhere, whatever. But then all of a sudden it turns and they're starting to follow somebody or walk or meet with somebody. Sometimes it was just following somebody through a Marquet building all day, which made it very difficult just because you're in very high density areas with a ton of people, a ton of vehicles. So you're really trying to pull out details specifically of that target and make sure that you don't lose them. You had an electro-optical, being the day TV camera, that you could see colors, and that was obviously very good for targeting and tracking, because you can pull a lot of detail from, a colored image than you can a black and white image. I always tell people that, I could tell you what color a license plate is, I can't tell you exactly what the license plate says. And then the infrared was black and white. You can gain your own information from pulling out heat signatures and things like that. Sometimes one wheel would run hotter than the other 4 on a vehicle. And so then we knew, all right, that's our vehicle because that back right wheel is hot. So a drone strike is carried out in multiple ways. It's like a surgeon. You're preparing and operating in a certain way, and you're following a checklist throughout the entire thing, all as methodical as possible. The chain of command is going to be, based off your intelligence, whether that's what you're collecting, whether you're collecting like signals intelligence, things like that with it. So there's many people that are within the chain that pair everything together and say, yes, because we watched this video of them from 3 years ago and correlated it with what you're seeing right now, along with 10 other things, then we're 99% confident this is the same person. And or it could be as simple as, this is an active threat, we need to take them out now. And then usually, we would pass on the information to, our pilot that was the lead for the day. Then they would run through their own chain of command with it, and then essentially come back with authorization saying, yes, we authorize you to conduct that strike. Sometimes that could take hours, sometimes that could take seconds. Usually the decisions that were being made were done, outside of our room. But that's the beauty of what we did, is you could send the real-time feed anywhere in the world to put this information right in front of people and allow them to make real-time calls. With the aircraft, you've got, everything, every munition on it for the most part is laser guided. The laser comes from the camera, shines down, and there's a little reticle on the screen, a little crosshairs that wherever I move, the laser's in the middle of. If I drag it to the right, well, then my missile is going to start guiding to the right. Because of that, I had to be extremely precise in that time, and most time of flights of a missile is between 30 and 40 seconds. That was usually the correlation between the two with the laser and the crosshairs, was wherever that got moved, that's where the missile went. The difference between a drone pilot and a drone sensor operator is the pilot you think of as the person that is controlling the plane, flying it to where it needs to be in a point in space. They are utilizing what we call stick and rudder. And the sensor operator is the one that controls the camera on the aircraft, actively following targets, manipulating it to pull out details, contrast, brightness, gain, level, things like that. And then the pilot is the one that actively pulls the trigger and employs a weapon, while the sensor operator is the one that is actually lasing in that weapon. Everything is a two-part process. During any strike, my responsibility as a sensor operator was to essentially back the pilot up on the entire strike flow. So making sure that, if they were going to pull a trigger at a certain range from the target, that they were at that range and they were holding in the correct place to do that. Once we were nose to the target and driving in, the pilot would pull the trigger, the weapon would come off the rail, it would cause the screen to go fuzzy. It's got to do with the missile plume. And then once that cleared, if it was a moving vehicle or something like that, I would try to get a track on it. It was, again, this trying to manipulate the picture, manipulate the camera, make sure the pilot's doing what they're supposed to be doing, and also making sure that I don't forget to turn a laser on, otherwise the missile's not going to hit the target. And then for the next 30 seconds, it's all on me to make sure that wherever I move my crosshairs, that missile's going. So I've got to be insanely steady with how I, move those crosshairs so that way I don't miss my target. The reason that the pilot and the sensor operator is a two-person crew, right, is one, just because at least right now, the technology, while they've tried, it just doesn't work. It's way too technical, especially on the sensor operator side, and needing to be able to make real-time decisions and changes and things like that. I mean, they attempted to even put technology in it 20 years ago to say, hey, snap to these targets and look here. But because of, magnetic fields and rotational drift and things like that, with the Earth itself, it doesn't work that way. You can't get something to fixate that precisely onto a target when you have so many moving parts to it. So the technology just really isn't there yet. You can't train a computer to do, or you can't train one person to do both jobs. So the MQ-9 Reaper, one of the most common ones out there that's flown today. This aircraft has a 66-foot wingspan, so it's pretty big. It's not the little quadcopters that people see buzzing around and everything else out there. This is a full-size aircraft, and it's controlled either line of sight, so needing a direct connection to the aircraft, or via satellite communication by bouncing signals into the sky off satellites around the curvature of the Earth, and then getting into wherever it's operating. The MQ-9 usually sounded like any really other turboprop aircraft. We always joked about the MQ-1, the smaller one, sounding like a lawnmower because of the snowmobile engine it had on it. But the MQ-9 was, was a 900 shaft horsepower engine on it, so it's pretty big size. And so you still had to worry about the sound signature, but it just sounded like, any other aircraft flying above your head. And because we operated at 20 to 30,000 feet, typical airliner altitude, unless you were in the right spot, being downwind from it, you could pick it up. But most of the time, we were so good with our audio signature, unless you were really low on the ground, you never really heard it. I had one strike that I was with a newer pilot that I don't think they had struck before. So this was their first time. I was fairly seasoned at the time. We got set up on the target. We knew exactly what we were going to do. It was a vehicle next to a building out in the open. The guy was just sitting outside his car, about as straightforward as it can come for a target. And it was like, okay, let's go ahead and turn in. And right when we got our clear to engage call, which is always the call that we were waiting for. At that point, once it came across the radio, the expectation was the trigger was pulled, my laser's already on, and then I'm at that point guiding. I waited for that individual to pull the trigger when we got the clearance call, and they didn't. And then instead I heard, "Okay, is everybody ready?" And I went, "What the heck?" I looked over and I'm like, "Pull the flippin' trigger right now." Because that was their responsibility. That was what they were supposed to do in that moment. Because any second we delayed, we let any external factor potentially come into play, right? Whether that's a person showing up or the person just getting into the vehicle and leaving, we didn't know what was going to happen. Right? So anytime that it was, a nice clear-cut situation like that, you wanted to move as fast as possible to capitalize on it. Bus full of nuns is what we always call the proverbial bus full of nuns, saying that any given time when you're employing a weapon, a bus that is figuratively full of nuns on it could be driving into that, target area, things like that. So it's essentially comes down to you just always have to plan for the unplanned. So needing to focus on what could happen, and while you hope nothing does, you always have to be prepared for it. We had one time where we had to abort in a strike as all of a sudden the vehicle started moving, and they started driving towards a gas station. And we didn't want to, obviously, have our weapons impact next to a gas station. So we aborted it. And, usually with that is the rule is you're going 90 degrees off from wherever your target is. And you're utilizing maps that you have up to be able to quickly make decisions within split seconds of exactly where I'm going to shift that weapon. Hope to God nobody's standing there, and hope that, it's in a wide open field. Because like I said, we try to control as much as we can, but at the end of the day, there's only so much you can. So with that one, we shifted the missile off to a field, and it impacted in the field, 200 meters away, and everything was A-okay. I'm sure the person on the ground was like, "What in the heck?" But past that, it all went by the book. A lot of the parameters in aborting a strike is set around how important the person is, right? If it's somebody that's super high value, an immediate threat, it's going to take a lot more to abort that strike than there would be if it's just somebody, super low level. There's so many decision makers when an abort gets called. Sometimes that can be on the crew. Sometimes that can come from way high up in the chain of command as well, that they hold the authority on the abort. One of the most important things when you're striking a target is minimizing the sonic boom of the missile. Because depending on how far off of the nose of the aircraft you get, the farther I get away from that, the longer the sonic boom is, which just gives somebody the ability to hear, the missile. So the aircraft is driven to a certain point in space at that time, and then a trigger is pulled to make sure that this comes in at the exact angle it needs to, because I can't have a weapon that comes into the roof of a building and punches out the side of the room because I didn't do my angles correctly. So we had a lot of programs and things like that would do the math for us, but it was a lot of interpolation of the data and making sure that what we were planning for, we actually executed. My ground control station was the base outside Las Vegas, Creech Air Force Base. We operated there while our plane was 7,500 miles around the world, in Afghanistan. This is about a 30 by 10 foot kind of shipping container looking box, if you will. It had nice padded, carpeted walls and a ton of, servers and electronics. So usually they're pretty cool temperature wise, just because you've got a ton of, electronics running throughout the room there that you have to keep cold. And then usually you had dim lighting throughout, because any type of bright lights would cause glare on the screen. And then you had usually 2 different keyboards, 2 different mice, 8 different screens that you were looking at any given time. We did shift work, so you were on 8 a.m. to 4 p.m., 4 p.m. to midnight, midnight to 8 a.m. Rotation. Day in the life was usually wake up, 6 a.m., throw the flight suit on. I'd get in, sit down in what we call mass brief, essentially briefing the entire team that was flying that night. You flew with the same people for the most part every night. You'd get the briefing, you'd get the things like the intelligence of what's going on, right? Is there specific target factors that we need to worry about? And that could be, just basic target data on the person, how many kids they have, who their wife is, what color vehicle they drive, what compound they stay at. And then the weather, needing to know things like what the winds are doing, things that are going to affect us overall for the mission itself. And then you'd get farmed out on who you were flying with for the night. And that could be anything, which turned into some grueling nights and some long shifts and things like that, because you were having to sit for 6, 7, 8, sometimes 10 hours, and some people did 12 pretty regularly. The shift work in itself was just grueling, just because of how quick we had to rotate. You're trying to fight your circadian rhythm at that point, which just wasn't happening. So then you get less and less sleep and things like that were obviously impactful in doing such a high operation tempo mission and trying to run on like 2 to 3 hours of sleep. I was stationed at Creech for 4 years. Never fell asleep in the seat or fell asleep during a mission, but there was plenty of people that did, just because of the crazy operation tempo that we operated at. We just white knuckled through it all. It was just whatever, grab another energy drink, grab another cup of coffee, or some popcorn with jalapenos in it, and hope that it does the trick. Flipping the switch is used to talk about, going from work to home and home to work. I live by myself for the most of the time. So there's plenty of times where it was simple things like, I left the trash can out and some HOA's mad at me or something for it. But I got to bring that into work with me. I got to try to flip that switch off and say, okay, I got to deal with that at, 10 hours from now, because for the next 10 hours, I need to worry about my job. I enlisted when I was 18 years old. I was fresh out of high school. I didn't feel like college was for me, and I didn't really want to go and turn a wrench, which seemed like about the only thing to do when I got out of high school, was to do one of those two things or the military. So I picked the third option and joined the military, and I had a recruiter talk to me about drones and said, hey, this is what you're going to be doing. You're going to be watching convoys and things like that, and I thought that sounded pretty cool. So I said, all right, let's go ahead and do it, and jumped on. When I joined the military, there wasn't a lot of info on what the job even was. It was just, hey, you're on drones and you're controlling a camera. That's really all anybody knew, especially back in 2010. What I was expecting when I joined was that I was going to be what we call Overwatch for convoys, things like that, and being able to kind of provide that eye in the sky, if you will. Didn't realize how what we call tip of the spear it really was. One of the first times that I realized that I was going to be actively employing weapons on this aircraft was about halfway through my training, when somebody made a comment, just I think in a break room or something like that. Looking back on it, I don't know if I was necessarily too young, but definitely wasn't set up for what the expectations were and how grueling of a job it was going to be. Because a lot of jobs are like that within the military. You set 18, 19-year-olds to go out and do things, and nobody's preparing them for it. My path for training was going through basic military training at 8 weeks. Then I went to a aircrew fundamentals training past that. I think that one was 3 to 4 weeks long. I trained in New Mexico at Holloman Air Force Base for about a 6-month program, what they call initial qualification training. The first time that you get hands-on with the aircraft, sitting in a ground control station, because obviously you're not physically, inside the aircraft. After you complete that 6 months, you get moved on to your combat unit and go through what's called mission qualification training. It can vary in length as far as how long that goes, but it's specific to that unit, because not every unit does the same mission set. Our training was a combination of academics, simulator training, and also live flight events. Every time you were hitting a certain phase, you would go through academic training on it, learn all there was to about it, the regulations, the rules, what you could do when. Then you'd go through simulator training, essentially something that mimicked the ground control station. You'd go in and you'd brief the event. You'd have 2 instructors, one for the pilot, one for the sensor, 2 students then, 1 sensor, 1 pilot, that would all get talked through really what the mission was for the day. Very similar to how a fighter pilot trains. The simulators were done because that's where you can make mistakes. That's where you can screw up. That's where you can do things that are different and dangerous and press that reset button, where the live flight, you didn't have that option. You start out with just the basics of this is what button means what. And there's a lot of them. What the menus are and how to navigate them and how to utilize those buttons and menus to then get into these events. and pair it with a mission, the live flights were done the exact same way. We trained on close air support, strike coordination, reconnaissance, air interdiction, combat search and rescue even. There's only a handful that I saw that actually washed out through the initial training of it. But most of the time when people washed out, it wasn't the traditional, way that you would in like SEALs training or something like that. It was more so somebody just threw a hand up and said, I can't do this anymore. They were ushered out quietly as much as possible just because you didn't want to have it impact everybody else around you. There was definitely a learning curve on our side. The simulators were notably, and especially 15 years ago, were notably poor when it came down to the image quality, different things like that. We called them simisms. That's a simism. Like, we can't do anything about it. So you just have to wait until you get into the jet, to be able to see how it really works. So I was fresh out of the schoolhouse, got to my first combat unit, had barely been there a month, seeing active combat missions flown for the first time, watching all the feeds every day. And I was sitting in a training event, and all of a sudden, in the middle of the training event, we got a call over the radio for that there's troops in contact. Troops in contact is when anytime any friendly forces are taking fire and they need our support, and usually needing something to do with flying or potentially operating what we call danger close. So it falls underneath the close air support mission set. So that call came over the radio. It was a JTAC on the ground. He was screaming, saying, any player, we're taking fire. Essentially we need help at that point. And so then we jumped on and responded. The pilot cued the mic, said, hey, we're only a couple miles away. We'll be there in 2 minutes. Get eyes on. At that time, I was still in being trained, so I wasn't qualified to stay in the seat and execute a strike. So the instructor that was behind me just leaned over, tapped me on the shoulder, and said, swap. Then he turned around and swapped me in, and then I stood over and watched as they were frantically trying to search for where those friendly forces are and really where the enemies were at that point, because then you're trying to figure out who's who within that, because all you see is gunfire. My first strike was January 20th, 2013, at 6:49 in the morning. Just sitting on a target, watching some top of a mud hut, nothing going on, and then all of a sudden we got a call over the radio saying, hey, we need you to move this other target area. So we started heading that way. I was pulling up graphics for it, looking at the intel, figuring out, all right, what's this location? What's the issues around it as far as is there a bunch of trees, is there a bunch of buildings, things like that. And it ended up being a cave in the middle of nowhere. And there was a handful of people there that they wanted us to take out. We'd go through that methodical checklist. My pilot and I did things like planning for if we need another weapon immediately afterwards because some person runs or something like that. Well, then we have to be prepared to, take care of it. We in turn would get all the weapons ready, be ready for that re-attack posture, is what we called it. And then we went through and executed the strike at that point and took out a handful of people at this cave. And then we had to then immediately do a re-attack, and the person I was tasked to re-attack was sitting behind a rock. And, we turned in and we had to change the angle we were coming in from because it was like a hallway almost with two rocks side by side. And you've got to worry about the missile coming in at a certain trajectory, being able to be effective. It's not the movies, right? It's not that, a Hellfire missile comes down and it levels the city block. It's so much smaller of an explosion. 2.5 years that I had trained up to that point, all of it came to fruition in that moment. That was the bar that was set, was can you go through and execute a strike effectively, and can you work under pressure? And when that strike came out successful, that told everyone that I could do the job and I could be called on to do it again. When we got onto that target and we were actively coming from a different target, everything was going so fast at that point. We were setting up a camera. I was calibrating my camera as we were rolling into the target area, trying to pull out the best picture I could at that point. So everything I was thinking, every thought that was going through my mind was all about the technical aspects of the employment, of shooting that weapon. There wasn't much, as far as being able to stop and think of, wow, I'm about to take a life. It was all about just the technical aspects of it all, and being able to go in and do your job. And that's all I was thinking about was, I better not screw this up. In that moment, back in 2013, I didn't have a clue what it was doing or how it was changing me or anything like that, because all I did was just look at it as, well, I'm doing my job, and this is what I'm trained to do. I can see the entire strike start to finish in my head, on everything from that first missile impacting to the guy running to reattacking him, and his lifeless body at the end of it. I've got thousands of events like that are burned into my brain. Being physically separated, 7,500 miles away from the target, after you're watching a person for a long period of time and then, needing to take them out, it was usually what happened in the moment with it. I had one strike that we watched. I watched a person essentially get sawn in half with a missile, and his wife dragged that half of him across the field. And so that one will always be burned in my brain. Can't hear anything, obviously, right? But I can still see the distraught on her face, and just, she was screaming, you could tell. And most of the time it wasn't the act of employing, it was more so like watching people literally tear each other apart. That was the stuff that stuck with me, and that was harder to deal with. One example of it is two people walking down an alleyway. One person all of a sudden reaches out, pulls a handgun out from underneath his thobe that he's wearing, and turns and just shoots the guy next to him. And the guy dropped, and then I just sat there and watched him bleed out. And then eventually the other guy just walked away, and they went, okay, follow that guy. And then you're sitting there and just actively following this person, and you have to process that you just watched somebody die. But again, you don't have time to process it. Not then. That was really the piece to it that was most difficult. There was no time that I disagreed with an order or anything like that with what I was doing. At the end of the day, I'm proud of the work I did. There were still targets at the end of the day. They were still doing bad things, and we needed to take them out. There's plenty of times that you looked at it after the facts and went, I don't really know what happened there. A lot of mission specifics, things like that, you can't talk about, right? Where we operated, who I was operating for, things like that. You just can't get into. And unfortunately, because of how much secrecy was put into it, and rightfully so, but now people feel like they can't talk about just their basic emotions. It was just strike the target, move on. Strike the target, move on. And so that's what we did, and we're very good at it. I would say I definitely wasn't emotionally prepared to deal with any of this, coming out of it, because it wasn't like, anybody openly at any time said, hey, by the way, you're going to struggle with this. I have a best friend that a couple months ago, he had a doctor that looked him in the face and said, well, you didn't deploy, so how can you have trauma? Do you have any idea how much of a kick in the face that is for somebody that's done thousands of hours, over 1,000 combat missions, and just you're gonna turn around and say that to somebody, and tell them that they can't have an issue? It's not when people are in and they're doing it that they recognize there's an issue. It's when people get out and finally pick their head up and go, oh, holy cow, I've got a lot that's impacting me because of the work I did. No one's looking at how is this affecting people when they walk out of that box, take that flight suit off, say, I'm done serving, and and then go and work, whatever job they're going to. Nobody's looking at what's happening to that group of individuals, because I can promise you that's the group that's struggling the most.
Who do we have here with us today?
Up. Good boy. Up. Come on. Come on. Come on. Do it. I know you can. There you go. So, there you go. This is my service dog, Hawk, or Lord Hawthorne. And I've been with him for going on 3 years now. And he is my PTSD trained service dog. Come on, off. Good boy. Right here. Stay. He is for post-traumatic stress. So he does things like watch my back. Will put pressure on my feet in certain moments or alert if there's someone walking towards me, anything like that that I don't see. Most people, that's the big stigma out there, is everyone thinks it's a video game. That one always cuts everybody pretty deep just because of, it couldn't be farther from the truth. You're making life or death calls every single day. You could have multiple people operating underneath one mission set. You may not have all the intel. There's a lot of things that you're trying to prepare for and a lot of preparation that goes into it. And at the end of the day, there's no reset button. There's no, hey, I just gotta turn it off and go home. That plane's still flying when I leave that box. The whole, gamers make great drone operators is, while there's some skills I'm sure that transfer, there's not a single game in the world that can prep you for what you're gonna do and the decisions that you're gonna have to make, and and the high caliber level that you're gonna have to operate at. I would say some of the technical skills, right, is being able to multitask, being able to be strategic, being able to make quick decisions, right? Decision making needs to be fast, to the point, because you're pivoting so much throughout on any given mission that you just don't know what you're going to be setting yourself up for throughout the process. Drone operations today compared to 10, 15 years ago are, I would say, different in some aspects, but underlyingly not. The missions, the things like that they're doing are still going to fall underneath the same area, but it's not going to be at such high operational costs that we did. You're not flying as insane amount of hours, but the life or death decisions you're making are still there. And you still have to go home and, see your wife and kids or your fiance or whoever at the end of the day. So the situation in Ukraine is absolutely changing everything that we look at with warfare. I mean, they've essentially made their own Air Force with small, first-person view UAS. My concerns with autonomy and AI within drone warfare would fall under if they ever take the human completely out of the loop. Letting software make life or death decisions, I think, is where we have to draw the line. And there's always got to be a human behind that, kill chain, behind that decision-making authority. The second we go away from that is, then where do you draw the line? If AI was in charge in my past missions, I mean, the impacts could have been horrible throughout it. With the drone strike in 21 that killed a bunch of civilians, that's something that, is horrible, right? We hope that never happens. And at the same time, it's one of those that it's war, but you absolutely, you do everything you can to prevent it from happening again. I think the moral injury piece of it is never going to go away.
What are some things that work for you in terms of dealing with your PTSD?
A lot of it is just, one, communicating it, and being able to talk to others about it. And I found that to be extremely therapeutic, if you will, by recognizing and allowing, people to understand that they're not alone when it comes to this, that this is a completely normal thing. I left the Air Force in September 3rd of 2018, moved to North Dakota to work for a contract company doing essentially very similar work to what I was doing in the military. I left the Air Force just because I had finished my tenure at the schoolhouse, or I was coming up on it, and the only option, being a younger staff sergeant at the time, was to go back to a combat unit and go right back into shift work and everything else. And I just knew after, I was at 8 years at that point, that my body was just tapped, and that I couldn't do that work anymore. I couldn't put myself back into, that shift work and everything else. So I was getting paid around $38,000 a year to do that job, and with the, moral injury and mental stress that went with it, it definitely wasn't nearly enough than what I should have been making. To be 19 years old and thrown into that role, and have pulled my first trigger at 20 years old, arguably it's a big reason that I got out too. Hard to keep doing that ops tempo and that type of job when you're getting paid peanuts to do it. So I think the biggest thing that with PTSD and mental health and drone pilots especially is 10 years ago it was laughed at, that people could have it. So we're still fighting those stigmas, which is a huge problem for that community, because I think it's rampant throughout the community. Nobody wants to recognize it, And, you know, the veterans themselves are just shells of themselves, you know, on any given day now, and it's hard enough to put their feet on the ground, let alone go out and do a job and, be a productive member of society. There's a lot of things that, that trauma evolves and manipulates my day-to-day, if you will. It could be things like, checking tree lines, because again, my anxiety is so high that I'm constantly, if something's moving, things like that, my brain wants to know, what is that? What's that piece of information, right? What's that sound? And then it's just trying to constantly, push out a lot of negative thoughts, negative beliefs because of the moral injury piece to this that make it just difficult to operate on a day-to-day. To be frank, being a drone operator, it's taken a toll on me in my life and my family, my relationships, things like that. It's difficult for me to maintain relationships. It's difficult for me to maintain friend circles. It's difficult for me to talk to family about it, because unless somebody actually sat in that box and did the job, they don't understand. They can try to, but most of the time it ends up doing more harm than good, trying to relate to it instead of just being supportive in the moment. Remote Warrior is an organization that I started. We're building so many different things to just be able to put language to this, put common, vernacular behind all of it and make it make sense for people that are dealing with this. We've got a guide out that's called the Fog of War Guide that we put plain language into what people may be feeling, from things like, thoughts bouncing around in your brain so fast it feels like a ping pong ball has been fired off, and that you can't focus on what you're saying. So it's being able to bring these tools and these education, materials to people, people that are struggling, but also the VA, Guard and Reserve units, academia. I mean, you name it. We have training plans, lesson plans for all of it to bring in, discussions on identity crisis, moral injury, all these pieces that come into play, and that, these, industry professionals need to understand and need to start taking the human into account, and not just the person on paper.
My name is David Marquet. I commanded a nuclear-powered, fast-attack Los Angeles class submarine, one of the most powerful, lethal, and silent weapons on the planet. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. You're poorly fed, poorly rested, feel like you're under stress basically all the time. There's so many things that can kill you, let alone the enemy. But that was the deal. We were on a mission, defending liberal democracy. Everybody is just working together. Nuclear submarines are classified as nuclear because they have a nuclear propulsion unit. So the thing that drives the submarine is a nuclear reactor. Currently, the U.S. has a fleet of submarines. First, they're the attack submarines. The SSNs, that's the sexy job. This is the kind of submarine that I commanded. The attack submarines are like the fighter jets of the submarine force. We go far, far in front of all the friendly forces, and we operate deep in enemy territory. The other kind of submarine that we have, we call boomers, or ballistic missile submarines, and they're identified by the designator SSBN, which means ballistic missile. The N at the end means it's nuclear powered. SS is the Navy code for submarines, so SSBN. These submarines are there in case there's a nuclear attack on the United States. These submarines can't be targeted. They're so good at hiding, they can be quieter than the ocean around them. We had two basic kinds of weapons, Tomahawk missiles and torpedoes. Mark 48, heavyweight torpedo. One of the things that makes this American submarine so good is the torpedo tubes aren't at the front of the submarine and don't shoot straight out. We moved the torpedo room back about a quarter of the way, and it's at the bottom. And the torpedo tubes are angled, they're canted, we say, on the sides of the submarines. So if you want to shoot a target that's straight ahead, the submarine, you have to make these mental calculations. The torpedo goes out at an angle, and then it's got to align. So this is a mathematical problem. It's one of the reasons why not all navies do this. Secondly, there's an engineering problem, because if they shoot the torpedo out the side and the water catches the torpedo, it doesn't impulse out fast enough, then it can kind of get jammed, or it's like sticking your hand out the car, kind of the car window kind of a deal. But when you can do it, now you move this noisy room, which is the torpedo room, back away from the sonar system. So the sonar system sits way up here in this quiet area, so it can hear better. Because it's back here, the submarine hull itself shields some of the noise. So if I were going to shoot a guy over here on the left, I would shoot him from a right side tube, because the submarine in the middle will mask the sound of the torpedo going out. It starts heading for the target, and it stays quiet. You want to stay quiet as long as possible. And it's trailing a wire behind it, which is connecting the torpedo to the submarine. And it's a two-way wire. So we're continuing to monitor the target. No sound, no sound, no sound from the target. Target doesn't know it's coming. Good. Just keep going. Or all of a sudden, maybe big burst of noise from the target. We see here the propellers going. Oh, they're turning. They must have detected the torpedo. But now I can steer right, 5 degrees. We can steer the torpedo, and the torpedo tells us what it's seeing. It's sending back these cryptic messages. So here's the target. Torpedo's coming in. It actually never hits the ship. It'll go under the ship and it detonates. We're going to blow a big hole in the ocean. Why? Because ships are designed to be stabilized by all this water around them. And when there's a big hole in the middle, it goes like this, and it cracks in half. Even a big destroyer, only the captain's the person who can authorize that. It's tragic. We never like to sink a ship and kill people, because we're humans. And it also means if you had to do it, it means that deterrence in a sense failed, because you're at war. So, but like if you mess around, we're going to put you on the bottom. We're going to chase you till you can't stay awake, and then we're going to put you on the bottom. We have two basic kinds of missiles in submarines. One, we have these Tomahawks. They can go 1,000 miles. These are the kind of missiles where you see in the news, the Navy launched missiles at the beginning of the Iraq War. They launched missiles into Iraq. They're about the same size of a torpedo. In fact, they're designed so that they use the same handling equipment, basically. They go through the same size tube and all this kind of stuff. And the way that works here is you get an order to launch missiles. Now, as a submarine commander, you don't really know what's at the other end. You can read the targeting package. We're just kind of the armory that gets it there and then launches it safely. And it goes up in the air, then it does its thing. So you would only launch those on order from higher up. Then a whole nother level, nuclear. So that's highly controlled. You have to get one of these specially formatted messages. You have to decode right, and then it has to say the right thing in the message. And then we break these codes, and you have two sets of officers independently checking, sort of like two-party authentication on your phone, but the links are longer. But let's say the link is 1-2 Alpha Bravo. And so you'll have one group of officers, you have a pair over here, and they're like, 1-2 Alpha Bravo. And then the officer is looking at the message, looks at it, and says it matches 1-2 Alpha Bravo. And then over here in a different part of this, a few feet away, another pair of officers doing the same thing, but they'll do it backwards. So those like Bravo, Alpha, 2-1. And so we're doing this multiple ways to make sure that no one makes a mistake and it's an author and it's a thing. And then they come together and they agree and they talk to the weapons officer and the second in command and the captain, and they have to all agree. So it's a very serious business. At a moral level, you know you're ordering the death of people. It's not like the movies. It's not cool. You're not happy. It's sobering. The captain on a submarine has a lot of authority to punish people, a scary amount of authority. So I can fine a person, I can reduce them in rank, which would take them maybe 2-3 years to recover from. Well, actually, you never recover because you're always then behind. So that's terrible, because then you also lose pay. I put them in 3 days bread and water. If I want to do more than that, I got to get someone's permission. So there's this big code book we call it the UCMJ, Uniform Code of Military Justice. It's got all these rules about what punishments basically are assigned to different things. So some of the really bad things to do are AWOL, or unauthorized absence, leaving your post, falling asleep on watch. Insubordination, I'd say, is incredibly rare. I cannot remember a time when someone deliberately didn't follow their orders, which is good, but it's also bad because then you got to be really careful when you give an order. They're going to do it. They're going to try and do it. And if it's not right, they're going to try and still do it. And so you got to be really, I learned the hard way on this one. Integrity is really taken seriously. Whatever you say, we're going to believe you. The ballistic missile submarines have a lot of pressure to get underway at sea. We got to get out there with our missiles. This pressure to get to sea trickles down through the ship, and you come into port, you have a few days to fix everything that's wrong and go back out to sea. Sad situation happened when I was engineer. I had a chief who was I would say he was a good guy in the engineering department who took a shortcut. There was a technical thing with these bolts where the bolt head needs to be tight enough on the bolt threaded part that it's actually sticking out on the other side a little bit. I normally wouldn't do this, but I was looking at these bolts on this one big piece of equipment, and it just didn't look like it was right. And I said, that's weird, because there's sign-offs. It turns out that this chief had cut corners, signed off that they were good to go when he didn't know they were good to go. So he was gone the next day. Most of the time, to get communications, you got to stick a mast out of the water because radio waves don't penetrate the ocean. So you come shallow, you stick a mast out. There's satellites that go overhead at certain times. They download this burst, so they can download a lot of data in a very short period of time. So when the message comes in, if it's not in the right format, then it's not a valid message. Doesn't matter what it says. And the codes change all the time. It's like encryption on your computer. Things are coded at one end and uncoded at the other end. So it's got to get through all these wickets before you even read it and pay attention. We had a funny situation happen. This was during an exercise. We were in an exercise, we were supposed to sink another submarine. We had an exercise torpedo. So you take the warheads off and it's painted orange. Because we've been playing this cat and mouse game with the submarine, we haven't cleared the broadcast. And time comes up, and one of the junior officers, because we're so used to operating in peacetime, is like, oh, I need to raise the mast and clear the message traffic. And I kind of lost my cool then because, no, we're at war. We got to sink this guy, and then we can get the admin messages later. Most of your radio communications comes from these satellite communications, but we also have a backup. The backup is called ELF, extremely low frequency. So these are the big long antennas that are out in Minnesota, and they make the cow milk turn green. Just kidding. And they send these really long radio waves out so that the antennas need to be really, really long to send it a long wave. And because of really long wavelength, low frequency means that they penetrate the first little bit of the ocean. But we can run an antenna up that runs close to the surface of the ocean, and it can receive ELF radio. It's very limited data. So you get 3 letters. That's all you get. And then you look in a code book, it's ABC, nothing, ABC, nothing. But every once in a while, a letter will say, oh, we have something urgent for you. You got to come up and get your regular message. If you're on an SSBN, you are always getting these things because they always need to be ready to go into launch mode, and they are. And it's a huge deal if you're changing depth or something and you lost one radio mode before you get the other one. That's a huge deal. So you practice. You're always 100.0% of the time you have connectivity. Submarines can do things that you can't do on a lot of other ships. There was an exhibit at the Smithsonian that showed one of these things, so I know I can talk about it. It's called an underhull. Let's say Chinese or the Russians have this ship that we don't really know what it does, but it kind of sits there, doesn't really move. And we kind of get suspicious that, well, maybe it's dropping something or it's got something underneath it. So next time a ship gets underway, we have a submarine nearby. Sneak up, look up, see what's underneath the ship. We can do stuff like that. We can also collect intelligence from cell phone towers, radio waves, from radio transmissions between ships. Submarines are really, really good at this because they don't know you're there, so they act like they would normally act. They make the same communications, they get the same permissions, and we might not know exactly what they all mean at the time, but we collect it all, put it on these hard drives, send it back, and we build up this library of how they talk, and then you start to build up these patterns, which is really, really important. We spend a lot of time getting ready for war. Our philosophy is the more ready we are for war, the less likely war will happen. The more capable we are of sinking the enemy, the less likely the enemy is going to try something like invade Taiwan or something. So one of the things that you need to be able to do is operate your submarine for a long time out in enemy waters. Most of the time we don't advertise these things, but sometimes we'll do something. It's in international waters, so it's all legal. We'll shoot an exercise weapon, or we'll shoot an actual war shot. We do this every once in a while. We need to send these little signals, hey, we can do this, don't mess with us. If you come after us, we're gonna punch you in the nose, and we'll punch you in the nose so hard, you're going down, you're not coming up. You'd be surprised at how hard we work to follow all the rules. And when I mean rules, I mean like rules of international law and where you can drive the submarines. We don't go sneaking in another country's water. When we want to go someplace, we get permissions. But there are some traditional and legal waterways where you can go. For example, the Strait of Malacca, which is the waterway between Asia, basically, and the Indian Ocean that goes past Singapore and Malaysia, Strait of Malacca. But because it's one of these international straits, it's legal to go through there. We go through on the surface, fly an American flag. It's all above board. If there's land, then you draw a 12-mile circle around the land, if it's an island. Some countries, like the Chinese, they're taking these like underwater atolls that don't break the surface, or haven't in 1,000 years, and piling up with concrete, and then say, oh, that's an island now, and they draw a 12-mile circle around it. And we're like, no, that's not legal. So in a case like that, we would drive there, but it's not like we don't think we're violating international law. We think we're enforcing it by driving there. But if we did that, we'd probably send a destroyer or something that would be obvious to see. You don't send something that's secret and say, oh, by the way, we went over there. I think the public would be surprised at just how busy and active everybody on the submarine is. You're underfed or you're malfed, you're under-rested. You have your operational job, you're standing watch, and everyone on the submarine has to do that, officers and enlisted guys. Then when you're aft watch, you have more responsibilities. You have to do cleaning. You have to do some of this minor maintenance, changing oil, checking machines, changing gaskets, fixing a small oil leak, that kind of thing. And for the officers, we're not necessarily doing the cleaning, but planning what happens next, where are we going to go, how are we going to get there, getting the charts ready, looking for hazards. Okay, we need to go around this way because there's some uncharted seamounts, whatever it is. Then on top of that, we have training. Well, we'll do, say, a fire drill. A fire on a submarine is an all hands, everybody's involved. We sound the alarm, everyone wakes up, mans their station, mans their gear. Then you got to put out the fire, and then you got to put all the equipment away, so that's like half an hour. And this could happen at any time. Two worst things on a submarine are fire and flooding. The most common cause of fire on a submarine, it's mundane, it's dryer lint. There's one washing machine and one dryer, you got 140 guys. So they're pretty much going all the time. Flooding is really bad also. flooding can put you on the bottom. And so first of all, it starts with design of the submarine. So if the water sprays out, takes out the electrical panels, we can still operate some of these key valves without any electricity. And then if you have really bad flooding, then you have to emergency blow up to the surface. So we have these two handles in the control room. They're called chicken switches. And they also do not require electricity to operate. And they allow this compressed air in these cylinders to go through a very short length of pipe. It goes in the ballast tanks, blows the water out of the bottom of the ballast tanks. Submarine rises very rapidly. I never had to do that for real. We would practice it. There's a couple big rooms on the submarine: the engine room, the torpedo room, and the mess decks. The mess decks are where the crew eats. We have two dining rooms. We have a little dining room for the officers we call the ward room, W-A-R-D room. It's a table, long table, assigned seating, 12 chairs around the table. Then we have the mess decks, again, long tables. It's like picnic tables set up. And the submarines, you could decorate your mess deck. So on Santa Fe, which was named after Santa Fe, New Mexico, we had pictures of the ship's logo and, painted cacti and, it's just a little kind of spirit thing. The space is so limited. So when we go to sea with 140 people, we only have 117 actually built-in beds. So a bunch of people are going to be sharing beds. We call it hot racking because the person gets out of bed and goes on duty, and the person on duty gets in the bed. It's still warm from the body heat. When you go to sea, you typically go out with 90 days worth of food. So when you go on one of these 6-month deployments, a couple times during the deployment, you'll stop and you'll bring on more food. Most of the food is dehydrated or canned or frozen. Your fresh food, basically 3 days, and then there's no more lettuce. And it's a big deal. Food's a big deal because there's not much else that you can do that's fun and socially brings the crew together. There are certain staples that submarine sailors like. One is hamburgers, which we call sliders. One is pizza, which we always serve on Friday night. And one is ice cream. And we have an ice cream machine. We call it the Auto Dog, which isn't pleasant to think about, but it's a very important machine. So you have the machine that makes oxygen, and then you have the ice cream machine. We try and maintain all the rituals. So we'll celebrate Thanksgiving and Christmas holiday, and we have halfway night's a big celebration. The mail is a big deal. Hearing from the families is a big deal. Well, back when I was doing my time as a submariner, so I'm talking like 80s, 90s, early thousands, the families were allowed to send these very short cryptic messages, like 40-word messages. And then, of course, you're dealing with people in their 20s and 30s. So you can imagine, some of the wives are trying to sneak in, little sexy things. And so you kind of let that go, but you can't say, for example, traumatic news like, hey, your dad died. We'd filter that out and make sure the sailor got that in some kind of a controlled way if they were sent that. And we bring the sailor in. They always know it's better. Like if the captain and chief of the boat are sitting there and they call you in for they already know it's not good. And you just tell them, this is the deal. And at the next port, we're going to send you home. When you're on a submarine, you don't really have a sense of where you are in the ocean. You try and block it out, the fact that, hey, I'm hundreds of feet under the water. Submarine's very quiet. So it's kind of like a library where even though we don't really have to, we kind of speak in quiet hush tones. You do hear things. There's a lot of sound in the ocean, and most of it we know what it is. Oh, so that's an oil well, 1,000 miles away. I can't say we understand everything that goes on there, and sometimes the sound bends and distorts, and it's strange sometimes. I joined the Navy because we were in the middle of the Cold War. I was this geeky kid in high school, and my dad was a scientist, and I was on track. I should have been a scientist, but I really felt passionately about what we stood for with the Constitution and liberal democracy. So I graduated from high school in 1977. About 4 weeks later, right after July 4th, I reported to the Naval Academy as a plebe. You're in the Navy at that point. The day you show up, they cut your hair, you just line up in these long lines, you get your uniforms, just like you see in the movies. I loved it, and I had a small group of guys. I was a physics major, and we would study together. I knew I wanted to be a submariner because it just matched my personality. It was quiet, introverted, 3D chess was my jam, and it's hard to get accepted in the submarine force if you don't have a decent technical background. There's two paths into the submarine force. There's the officers and the enlisted. In the U.S. Armed Forces, we have this dichotomy, and it's basically split. If you have a college degree, you're going to become an officer, and if you don't have a college degree, you're going to become an enlisted person. It has nothing to do with intelligence or motivation. It's good for the force to have a diversity of thinkers, but most of the guys are engineers, physics majors, math majors, that kind of thing, because you're running a nuclear reactor. I had all A's, so I graduated right at the top of the class, and we have, at the Naval Academy, you have a thing called Service Selection Night, which is, I think, maybe like 6 months before you graduate, maybe a little bit longer. You get to express your preference for where you want to go. Rarely were people forced to go into submarines. There is separate training for the submarine force. Most of it is technical, but there's a screening process, which I just vaguely remember. There's these psychological exams that you take, and they ask you questions like, you have free on Saturday night, what would you rather do? Stay at home and read a book, or go to a bar with your friends? Stay at home, read a book. So that's the kind of question. Hey, if this happened, would you be mad, sad, happy, whatever. And so we're looking for people like no drama mama kind of people. We do a lot of training that puts people under stressful situations. One of the most memorable trainers that we have is a flooding simulator. It's basically a small room. So it's a couple floors high, but it's not very big. You have a team. There's maybe 6 of you. You have these little, we call them bandits, or these little straps and plugs for patching leaks and holes. They tell you, so here's what's going to happen. The water's going to spray out. If you guys don't patch the leaks, the water's going to keep rising, and you all die. Well, what they don't tell you, the water is frigging cold, and it hits you with force. It's like a fire hose that's at 33 degrees. And so you're sort of stunned. And the instinct is, oh, I see a hole, I see water spraying out, let me go do it. But that's the instinct that kills you. Why? Because what you need to do is get the holes on the bottom first. Because what happens is, if there is a hole down here and then the water starts to fill up, once the water fills up past that hole, it's super hard to patch that hole, because then you don't see it, you don't know what's down there. And so there are a lot of these things where your instinct is to do A, but you need to do B, and so you need to kind of override your impulsive instincts to do the right thing. But then you get through that, and everyone's laughing, and not everyone makes it through the training process. And if someone's ill-suited, they generally self-select out of the program, because they know, hey, this isn't for me. So I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1981. So we're in the height of the Cold War. Typical deployment cycle is 6 months, plus or minus sometimes a little bit. So the whole cycle is a 1.5 years training, 6-month deployment. 1.5 years workup, 6-month deployment. During the 1.5 years workup, you're at sea about 1/3 of the time. My favorite deployments are my first deployment when I was a junior officer on board the Sunfish, because this is back in the Cold War. And the Sunfish was a SSN, and it was super cool. Sunfish operated out of Charleston, South Carolina. You go out locally, maybe down the Bahamas, up and down the East Coast, and you would train, you would operate the submarine, you would get everybody up to speed. As a junior officer, on the operational side, I was officer of the deck, so I was drive the ship for 6 hours once a day, and I'd have various division officer jobs. I had a captain who was sort of a very strict, formal, authoritarian guy, but still a guy who really knew his stuff, and you would follow into battle. Then he was replaced by a guy named Mark Pelias, and who later became an admiral. And Admiral Pelias was great. He was really good at empowerment. If it was varsity level stuff, he needed someone to drive the ship, he'd get me up there. So we're getting ready for one of these deployments. We're going to go up and chase the Soviets around. And there's a part of the Atlantic Ocean which we call the GIUK gap, which is Greenland, Iceland, UK. And the Soviets, if they were going to come out in the Atlantic, had to come through that GIUK gap. So we're off the coast of Charleston, so we're not anywhere near any Russian submarines. And I'm on the periscope. We're just doing a training exercise, and we're just tootling around. And I look out, and I see this merchant ship on the horizon. And we use the sonar system very judiciously on the submarine. We listen all the time because listening is quiet. No one knows you're there. We're collecting, we're listening. We occasionally use active sonar, which is what you see in the movies, like ping, pew. And so you go out with this big pulse of sound, and then you get an echo back. It's a trade-off because as soon as you do that, that sound can be heard a lot further than when you get useful information back. So it can be heard for miles and miles. And it can be fingerprinted into not just a submarine, but a U.S. submarine. So we're very judicious. We don't use it. You need the captain's permission to use this active sonar. And I was talking to the sonar supervisor. Wouldn't it be cool if we could go active and get all the sonarmen up here so they could actually see what it looks like? And then all of a sudden I hear this voice, the captain's voice. He says, well, why don't you just tell me what you intend to do? I said, well, Captain, I intend to go active on sonar. So he says, okay, and he walks away. I'm like, what? So it's like basically like your dad handing the keys to Ferrari to you or something like that. It's crazy. And it's just like, it's so cool. Like the hair is sticking up on my neck right now, well, many years later. And we get all the sonarmen, they come and they look at the stuff, see what it looks like. We rotate them through, rotate some of the other crew members through. We do it for 5 or 10 minutes, and then, we're done. We got all the training out of it. And this playful attitude, this attitude of, this curiosity, like this was just me being a student again, a kid, and it was so cool. So then every time I went back on watch, the guys were like, hey, Lieutenant Marquet, can we do this? Let's go see how steep we can go down, and the last minute pull, or let's throw the rudder, let's go fast, flank, and then we'll throw the rudder over hard. So again, this was training off the US coast, so you wouldn't necessarily do this stuff unless you were running away from a torpedo or something, but because of that, we really understood what the submarine could really do, not just theoretically. We go to the GIUK gap. We're going up to where we thought the Soviets would be operating. We're looking for Soviets. We want to make sure that if we had to go to war with them, that we knew where the submarines were so we could take them out. You're young, it's exciting. You're doing this super cool thing that even now we can't talk about all the stuff that we did, and so that was cool. And we did good stuff. I can tell you, we would have kicked. There's no doubt. The hierarchy in a submarine is defined and is very clear, and there's always a backup person, a second in command, a deputy, or an alternate. And we'd run drills where we'd incapacitate the captain, because what we're trying to see is, can the ship operate without the captain? Because the captain may become incapacitated. Typically, a person doesn't keel over from a heart attack, but we had, so for example, the second in command, his father became really ill, so we needed to send him off the ship so he could go back to be with his dad, so we filled in. An officer's career path would be division officer, department head, second in command, XO, we call him executive officer, first in command, commanding officer, captain. On the enlisted side, it's a little bit different, but you move to what we call the COB, chief of the boat. Advancement in the Navy, both for officers and enlisted, is highly technical. No one gets advanced because, they're good looking or someone really, likes them or things like that. It's a meritocracy. On a submarine, there are 4 main departments. There's engineering. Those guys run the reactor. That is the biggest department. There's weapons, as you might expect. These guys maintain the missiles, the torpedoes, and the missile tubes and the torpedo tubes. There's what we call nav ops, or navigation operations. These guys run the charts. Where are we? The radio room. You get these missions that come in, And then the ops guys plan out, okay, we're here, they're there, how are we going to get there, when are we going to, that kind of thing. And then the final department is supply. They feed the crew, they manage all the spare parts, which is a big thing because you need to have all these parts, you have all these lockers all through the submarine, and then you need to know where the part is. The vast majority of senior submarine officers and admirals from the submarine force came through the engineering pipeline. There's three options: engineer, weapons officer, or nav ops. I did well in the schools that mattered for engineering, so I was pretty confident. So I wasn't too surprised when I got selected to be an engineer. Now the thing I didn't want to be an engineer on a ship in maintenance, because then you could spend 2 years, you might spend your entire time, 2-3 years, without actually driving a submarine. And that's death of a career. So I wanted a ship that was operational. I got vectored to the Will Rogers. The Will Rogers was one of these ballistic missile submarines. We were operating out of Holylock, Scotland. The Will Rogers was a ship in trouble. The ship had failed an important exam before I got there. This is an exam that basically lets them handle nuclear weapons. So it was one of the deterrent submarines. So they needed to do everything under supervision, and that's a terrible place to be. And then number two is they had a collision with a Scottish fishing trawler. Going there was a hard job. I was engineer. I was not a very good engineer. It was a really hard time for me. Fortunately, I squeaked through the cracks and I got advanced to the next level. I was coming up through the ranks of the submarine force and I got selected to be a submarine commander, which was I wasn't sure it was going to happen because I'd had this kind of dismal time on the Will Rogers. But I got selected. I was super excited. Being a submarine captain that's what my dream job was. That's what I wanted. You have maybe 10 to 12 junior officers, but you only have one captain. So there's kind of a 10-to-1 down select going from just once you're inside the submarine force. What the Navy does, because there's such a reliance on technical knowledge, is we send you to school for 12 months for the ship that you're going to command. And so there's this very orchestrated and choreographed system where we know you're going to command for 3 years. So at the 2-year point, we pick your successor, and then we send them to school. And at the 3-year point, they graduate from the school and they come out and they relieve you and you go to your next job and they take the ship for 3 years. And then 2 years into that, we pick their successor. I was identified what submarine I was going to go to. And it was a kind of submarine that was pretty well known to me. So a lot of what I was learning was stuff that was refresher for stuff that I already knew. And at the very end, what happened was there's someone at the 2-year point. It was the captain of the USS Santa Fe. There was a family issue going on with him, so he wasn't like 100%, like it was a distraction. And he said, you know what? Someone else got to do this. And he stepped aside. So now the Navy has a submarine, no captain. And I just graduated from school. And the officer who ran the school picked me. And I talked to him afterwards, and I said, well, why did you pick me? He said, oh, you're really curious. And this curiosity, I think, is going to stand you well. And I had no idea. He was so right, though. The Santa Fe only had 2 problems. She had the worst morale and the worst performance of the fleet. She had the worst re-enlistment rate in the Navy and had a bad reputation for getting the job done. The Santa Fe was a different kind of submarine. It was different. I'd never been on a submarine like this. Different reactor plant, had missile tubes. They moved the position of the fairwater planes down here. So now I'm about to take over the worst performing submarine on the fleet with the worst morale, and I don't know the ship. So that was scary. So I had 2 weeks to take over, and my head is like Alice in Wonderland. I just kind of walked around, I talked to people, but they're all looking at the floor, and it was dispiriting. Because one, they knew, they've been told, hey, you're the worst. The morale was bad, and now their boss quits. And they get this guy who wasn't even trained for their ship. And I make a big mistake. We're going to run an exercise, and the exercises we call a reactor scram. We're going to shut down a reactor. There's only one reactor. When you have the reactor on a nuclear submarine, it's amazing. You can surge through the water. You have all this power. You can run the refrigerators and the air conditioners and all the lights you want. When you don't have the reactor, it's terrible. You're draining down the battery. And so the drill we like to run, because I just wanted to see how the crew would react. And so we start the drill. I turn to the officer because I want to make it harder, and I say, hey, let's speed up on the electric motor, which is going to drain more current, drain the battery faster, and really compress the time. And it's going to add stress, basically, to the team. And I'm trying to, see just how bad we are. But it was an order that couldn't be done. It's essentially, hey, shift into second gear on a motor with one gear. And the sailor's like, he doesn't do anything. He was supposed to turn a knob and like, hey, what's going on? He says, Captain, there is no second gear. I'm laughing, but it was horrifying. That's like basic stuff. Now I'm looking at my shoes. And I look at the officer and I said, you know about this? He said, yes, sir, I did. I'm like, well, why'd you order it? Because you told me to. And then my whole life flashed before my eyes because I was so deeply ingrained in this idea that leaders make good decisions and they tell people what to do. And it was just all blew up in 1 second because there's no way I was going to be the one who knew what to do because I wasn't trained on the submarine. I know what we wanted to achieve, but what levers to push to make it happen, I was the wrong guy. So I got the officers together. I said, the drill's over. I said, how about this? How about I just stop giving orders? And they're like, huh, what? So I reached all the way back to that moment on the Sunfish when Goliath had asked me, well, Marquet, what do you intend to do? Say, Captain, I intend to submerge the ship. I intend to start the reactor. I intend to load torpedoes. I intend to change pizza from Friday to Saturday. Nope, don't do that. I think it was pretty novel, this language-based focus on using the word intent rather than getting permission. But it did spread throughout the submarine force. Part of it is because over the next 10 years of all these junior officers on board Santa Fe, there was a disproportionate number that became submarine commanders, 10 of them, 10 guys, which was a huge number. And no one would have predicted it, including least of all me, what happened. This conversion of people from order takers where we're reliant on the captain to have all the answers to 135 people thinking. I said we used to go from one thinker and 135 doers to 135 thinkers. People like to solve problems. And submariners are highly trained and you want to be good. And so they would work extra hard. And so morale went. Prior to that day, in the previous 12 months, we only re-enlisted 10% of the sailors, 1 in 10. Starting that day, it was 100%. Over the next 12 months, every sailor, a year from this date where I made a decision never to give any orders, we were inspected by the Navy. So these guys spend 3 days watching you do all this stuff. They're all taking notes. It's top to bottom, inside out audit. The inspection team, the officer, the captain on the inspection team, so he's senior to me, he says the highest score we've ever seen. It's the highest score we have records of. And no one could understand. Like, well, a year ago, these guys couldn't get underway on time. What happened? People didn't understand that it was because now we were activating this thinking. We were getting everybody thinking. And that's like that's the real dark side to being a leader who makes it happen. You think you're making it happen. You're like leaning into your team. You want your team to lean into you. American, UK, what the Australians are building towards, all have a certain capability which is going to be envied by the rest of the world. Very close to them are, I would say, guys like Japan, which have a very robust, highly capable submarine force, but they're not nuclear, so they can't do quite as much. But Japan, of course, they don't need to go as far to get to the battlefield. So a couple of things we could do. One, stay at sea for a long time because the equipment doesn't break, and if it breaks, sailors can fix it. So this ability to be there for a long period is really hard to combat that. It's really hard to build a defense system because it's not like you're trying to defend for a 10-minute attack. you're like, you don't know when the attack's going to come, and you got to defend for 6 months. Other countries keep their submarine for sea at a long time. It breaks, they got to go in. Or it just starts to degrade slowly, so it starts to rattle more, makes more sound. In other countries, they're much more reliant on the captain. The U.S., we have this really deep bench. And that you take away one officer, it doesn't really matter. Take away another, it still doesn't matter. Because everyone just sort of, they fill up into the ranks, and we practice it. We're always saying like, oh, well, if you were me, what would you do? If you were the captain right now, what would you do? And we kind of see, okay, how are they thinking? How are they thinking through how are they solving the problems? How are they managing the crew? How are they managing the problem? What tactical decisions are they going to make? The average age of a submarine force is getting older and older because we built up a whole bunch of submarines during the Cold War, and so the average age came down. Now it's getting longer. We're not replacing them as much. During the Cold War, there was a clear threat. Soviet Union. We were avowed enemies. And so there was a bipartisan consensus in the country, in Congress, that we need to spend money, buy submarines, because we knew how potent submarines were at deterring war. And then when the Soviet Union disintegrated, that sort of monolithic enemy went away. And so now we have terrorist groups or pirates off of Somalia. Submarines are not the optimum weapon for dealing with those kind of stuff. So this united front to maintain a healthy submarine force fell apart. Now we see the rise again of bad actors. I'll call them bad actors. Potentially China, certainly Russia. So now there's re-emerging this consensus that, hey, we really need to get our submarines going again. It's expensive, but you get a lot of bang for your buck when you buy a submarine. There are advances in submarines, in U.S. submarines. It's the same trends you see with automobiles to all electric. The Santa Fe had these big steam turbines, and so the reactor heated water, turned it to steam, and we did two things with the steam. One, we ran these turbines that made electricity, and then we ran these big turbines that went to this propeller. It's more efficient if you just make all electricity, and then you have the electricity to drive an electric motor. It's a more complicated problem, so that's why we haven't done it so far, but we're now, it's one of the things we're heading towards. I think submarines, just like drones or autonomous self-driving cars, the same thing's happening under the water. If you don't need to put people on a submarine, you can do a lot more with the submarine, because a lot of the equipment on the submarine is there to keep the people alive. But the people are the ones that fix the submarine. But the argument is, well, I can buy 100 of these underwater drones, so to speak, or one big nuclear submarine. I mean, who knows? But look what Ukrainians are doing with their drones. I play with AI every day at home, and it's fun. And AI certainly makes the bad guys smarter too. And for me, the worry would be spoofing one of these messages that tells the submarine, your new mission is to go over here, and puts the submarine out of position so that they can do whatever, something like, it's just any interference like that, which gets through the regular filters, and using AI to get better at that would be scary. I think it's a lot harder now to be a submarine officer, maybe, than it used to be. I can tell you, when I started, I mean, we were on a mission. We felt like we were the spear tip of democracy. First of all, just the proliferation of technology, I think, makes it so much, your brain is like always being pulled in these different directions. And then this overall arching sense of why am I sacrificing days of my life? I spent 14 years actually on submarines, and so I calculate I spent 7 years underwater in my life. I'm going to give up so much of my life, and for what? I just think it's harder now to have that really clear sense of purpose. My son was a submariner for a few years. So I visited his ship, I met, these are passionate, active, thinking young people. There was no monopoly on this sense of dedication, for sure. The introduction of women onto the submarines was happening about the time that I was transitioning off the submarines and sort of managing. It was sort of argued that, hey, we can't exclude half the population of smart people from submarines because we won't have enough smart people running the submarines. The way I thought about it was I need different ideas and different ways of thinking about the problem. And the more kind of different people that you get, typically you get more different ideas and thinking about the problems. Santa Fe is still in operation. She's doing well. I had an amazing time as the captain of the Santa Fe. 3 years went by too fast. We went on 2 deployments. We got the highest score in the history of the Navy. We turned retention around from 10% to 100%. I left the submarine and I got awarded a nice job. I was the inspector for the submarine force and then I became a Commodore. So I was getting promoted. For me, this idea going back to me not telling people what to do and seeing what they came up with and expressing intent really changed the model. And so now we like to say we're building leaders. It's a leader-leader organization, not leader-follower organization. And I feel good about that. I feel good about these people who had success. Many of them went on to major command, many went on to become admirals. Several, 3 at least, became admirals. And just from this one submarine crew, I went to the Pentagon, which was a frustrating time for me, and I was not the best Pentagon officer. I said that I was going to be more influential outside than inside, which I think is the right decision. I wrote Turn the Ship Around, which is a story, this turnaround on the nuclear submarine and this use of the word intent primarily. 2013, published by Penguin Random House. Then I wrote a book called Leadership as Language, which talks about the way language influences the culture. Turn the Ship Around was a big success, and I've been able to fly around the world and talk to a lot of companies. There's a lot of interest in creating teams where people are thinking and expressing what they're thinking, not just doing what they're told. So now I just wrote a book called Distancing, which is really helpful for everybody, including me. We have a superpower. Every human does. And the superpower is that you can imagine yourself as not you. Because when you go to make decisions, or when you go to react to something, we view it from our position of ourselves. We call it the immersed self. I view it from in here. This is where I'm centered. But you don't have to. You can pretend you're somewhere else, someone else, or sometime else. But we rarely do it. And it changes the way you think. And you get clearer vision. And I've been practicing every day, bringing it into my own life. People ask me, hey, do you miss it? And my flippant answer is no. Then I say, well, yeah, I'd love to go back on a submarine, but as a passenger, as a fly on the wall, I don't want any responsibility. It's too hard. I don't know anything anymore. But just to see, I almost said the word kids, see the kids operate, because again, like they're so young and they're energetic and they're thoughtful. Just see the crew operate, see them interact, see them do this really cool mission in the purpose of defending the Constitution, defending liberal democracy. If anyone has an opportunity, you definitely say yes.
My name's Mesa Gifford. Since 2022, I've been fighting alongside Ukraine against Russia as a volunteer. And this is everything I'm authorized to tell you. The Russian war machine is incredibly efficient, incredibly big, and incredibly dangerous. So for them, it's a war of annihilation. And the people you're fighting against are incredibly dangerous, oftentimes fanatical or desperate people that would torture you and kill you if they caught you. So there was an agreement. No one in the unit was allowed to be taken alive. Tens of thousands of volunteers from all around the world went out to Ukraine. Most to fight, but many more also went to act as humanitarians. I reached out to some friends of mine who were going to join a unit called the 131st, which was a battalion in the Ukrainian army. And it was only in really actually September, I suppose you could say, of 2022 that I joined the Ukrainian army for the first time. In the south with the 131st, in the first 2 stages of the 3 stages of my war, I was under the Southern Command. Ukraine is split into various commands in the north, east and south. The front line is vast. There are hundreds of thousands of soldiers. When we fought on the front line, we deployed as a unit of between 5 and 10. And we were all international volunteers. Ukraine, in many ways, is a war of innovation. Adaptability really is what could win or lose the war. The Ukrainians have had to expand their capabilities to meet this massive threat that they've faced. The most obvious place that is making the news in the West on a daily basis now is the utilization of drones, particularly commercial drones as well. In the early days of the war, it was DJI, a very popular Chinese brand, was utilized by both sides to act as a reconnaissance vehicle to locate Russian units. As time progressed, so did the innovation, and the commercial drones suddenly began dropping munitions. The munitions themselves evolved from being able to kill and wound a single soldier to suddenly blowing up a tank. And suddenly that drone that's worth just $2,000 is suddenly blowing up a tank worth $1 million. And then that becomes even more magnified with the utilization of FPV, first-person drones, or first-person view drones. These FPVs are commercially obtained. They utilize radio waves to between the controller and the drone itself, with a munition on it, which can be impact detonated or electronically detonated to strike a vehicle or a bunker or a set of people. Now, the Ukrainians really pioneered that, but because of the support that China gives to Russia, the Russians have been able to build and have been able to scale up their drone provision even more and much more rapidly than the Ukrainians. I think in more recent months, things have started to equalize a little bit, but there was a period just before I set up our own FPV team where I noticed that the Russians suddenly had the upper hand in the drone war in the south. We were struggling to move. Even drones themselves, these FPV drones have changed. My friends have been fighting in Kursk, and the drones that have been pioneered since that battle started have been fiber optic drones. And these fiber optic drones are unhackable, quite essentially, because the way that the Russians and the Ukrainians have countered the FPV drone, traditionally with the radio waves, is to actually introduce anti-drone technology that can bring these things down. And there were missions that I went on where we would lose 3-4 drones going after key assets. I have one in my mind right now where we were on a mission and we saw this, I think it was a T-90 or something, a T-90 tank, and we launched a drone at it and it flopped out of the sky. What happened? No idea. It could have been chance. Send another one. We sent up another one and it flopped out of the sky. We launched a third drone and sure enough, within 50 meters, it flops out of the sky and lands near them. So clearly that had an anti-drone technology on board and it was stopping us from hitting it. The utilization of these fiber optic cables is changed everything, because that drone will hit you. If it spots you and it's got a good pilot, you will die. And if you don't have anti-drone technology, the proliferation of drones means that the amount of casualties in the front line now is absolutely atrocious. In the first few months of my time in the 131st, we began a very rigorous series of missions, and those missions were confined mostly to the fields outside of a city called Kherson. Now, Kherson is a vast city in the south of Ukraine. It had been taken by the Russians very early on in the war, and the Ukrainians were determined to get it back. And they had a good chance because Kherson is on one side of the vast Dnipro River, and all the supplies getting to Kherson and to the front line were all having to come across this river. And with the introduction of American-made HIMARS and other weaponry, suddenly these landing points became a target for the Ukrainians. So the Russians in our area were very weak. And the Ukrainians were pushing incredibly hard. The early missions that I did were actually just intelligence gathering. So we would push out in patrols all along the zero line, just literally skirting the very edge of the Ukrainian positions, looking for minefields, speaking to local Ukrainian units, asking them what they've heard, what they've seen. And we did that for weeks and weeks and weeks prior to the final push towards Kherson, which liberated the city. There was one particular mission that we were deposited in a wood. We walked through it. We finally found this sort of Ukrainian position was at the very forefront of the Ukrainian army. There was nothing but no man's land in front of them, which also happened to be a long tree line leading towards a distant tree line about 900 meters forward. The Ukrainians were spooked. They'd been there for a few days, but they'd heard a lot of movement ahead of them, and they were worried that their small platoon of sort of 8 to 10 people wouldn't be able to hold the tree line if they were attacked. They asked us to go down as a patrol and to see what we could find. We were so close we could hear them cutting wood. We could hear a generator going. We could even hear them laughing. When someone shouted at someone else or laughed really loudly, their voice carried to us really easily. And that would have been an opportunity to pull back. But in the end, what we did discover at the end of the tree line were a number of trenches, which we then quickly cleared. There wasn't anyone in those particular trenches, but we did seize sort of radios, we seized weapons, a number of other items. It was clearly a place that they used to do guard duty. As we were robbing their trench, about sort of 25 meters away in another dugout, a Russian sort of spots one of our guys jumping in one of the trenches or moving between the trees and opens up with an automatic grenade launcher. And soon enough, our entire tree line was being absolutely obliterated by PKMs, AK-47s. Thankfully, as the bullets cracked around us, we were able to crawl out of that situation and get back to the Ukrainians, and we were able to report to them, yeah, there are definitely Russians down there. And we carried on. We kept on pushing down the tree line, and we met different units all the way along the front line for miles and miles and miles. And it's just a constant fear and a constant level of activity. From the moment you get up in the morning, you get into that armoured vehicle to get to the front line, to the moment you leave, your life is constantly in danger. On that one day, I nearly died about 1,000 times. But after the liberation of Kherson City, which, by the way, was one of the most defining moments of my time in Ukraine, sort of patrolling through those villages and seeing Ukrainian civilians coming out crying, I genuinely saw so many grateful people coming out of their homes after months and months of torturous Russian occupation. And it was a sense of fulfillment, of a realization that I'm doing exactly what I'm meant to be doing in Ukraine. That mission ended, the liberation was over, the city was free, and the new front line was the river, was where these islands were. That kicked off what I like to call the River War. So the 131st, it was fighting on the river in Kherson. The fight was terrible. There were a vast number of islands in the sort of Dnipro Delta. All these little islands became battlegrounds for reconnaissance units. And the 131st was perfectly placed, deploying in 5-man teams, pushing forward, taking ground. In 2023, something changed. And that was the Chinese began providing the Russians with a vast number of drones, FPV drones, DJI quadcopters capable of dropping munitions on people's heads. It became so dangerous on those islands that you couldn't even move without being spotted by the Russians. And the moment you're spotted, all hell breaks loose. There's mortars going off, there's shell fire, there's drones coming after you. And it's a terrifying environment to be in. But we would land on these islands, and then you'd hear that horrible hovering sound, the whirring sound of a drone, and then within seconds, you're still getting your kit out of the boat, and then bang! Like the earth-shattering roar of a mortar or a tank shell, and they come in fast. And as you're walking to your position, there are buildings around you blowing up. But you'd get to your position, hold the position for a while, for a few days. Sometimes you were replacing somebody. Sometimes the Russians wouldn't know exactly where you were. They later had a policy of actually just destroying everything. So if you're in a village, they would try and burn the whole village down just because they know you were there. They had a tactic of just sending drones over, dropping flammable munitions on top of the houses just to smoke us out. And that happened a few times. And then the drone would then watch. And as soon as it sees people running out of the burning houses, they'd then call in artillery. So we would dig into the basements. We'd rip up the floorboards, dig into the basements. We'd find forested areas, dig into the ground. And it was 1 week on, 1 week off. And we needed that because the tension is so horrendous. You're constantly on edge. You're sleeping underground most of the time, or if you can't be underground, you're inside a house, and there's constant shell fire. And it's just awful to wake up at 1 o'clock in the morning and suddenly, bang, the house is on top of you. You're buried in the house. And that happened a few times to us. There's no safety at all. You're hiding in a house and you hear the drones buzzing around the house. And it's 24/7. It's in the middle of the day. It's in the middle of the night. They fly around the house looking through the windows. You can try and shoot them down, but if you do that, there's a danger. The drone can't hear you, but observation groups might do. So if they say, oh, we can hear there's gunfire, and then sometimes good drone pilots can tell that they're being shot at, so it'll then fly away and then call an airstrike on that area, or they'll start shelling that area. If they spot you, they'll also airstrike you. So the drone won't necessarily kill you, but it will lead to your death if it spots you. One thing that gives me comfort, and people mocked me for in my battalion and in my unit, was I was obsessed by bunkers and being underground. So every time we moved positions, I would walk. The first thing I said as I walked into a house, is there a bunker? Is there a cellar? Is there somewhere for me to go? And the first thing I'd do was check it out. I'd jump in there. If there's a hole to jump in, I was always in it. And people would tease me for that, since I was like a rat. I'd become almost rodent-like in my how I operated. And what I mean by that is you spent most of your time either in a cellar or trying to take cover from mortars or drones and that sort of stuff. When you emerge into the lights, your whiskers are flickering, your nose is twitching, you're looking nervously from side to side, and any hint of trouble, you're running for safety. It kept me alive. It's kept me alive over the years, and it kept me alive in Ukraine. There's one particular incident where we were able to take personal effects from the Russians, and that was on the islands, when we pushed forwards to a house. Thankfully, the Russians had pulled back to another position just a few hundred yards away. But as we cleared that building, going through the different rooms, the Russians had left just a few hours before and had left everything behind, from their body armor to some of their weapons, but also their personal effects. I read letters in Russian to their sweethearts at home, to their wives, diaries and other things. As per usual, we gleaned everything for information, packed it into bags and sent it back to be processed, and took war trophies. In fact, two of the patches from that particular incident, this patch here and this patch, were from that house. I understand this is the hometown of where these Russian soldiers came from. My unit was actually stood down from a tempo of one mission a week, 1 week on, 1 week off, to suddenly not doing a mission in 3 weeks because of the danger of the islands. And it was that reason that I said to myself, there's a need here for our own FPVs, our own drones. So it was just an incredibly challenging environment, but we made it work. And the proof is in the pudding. Most of the islands in the Dnieper are free, and it's because of those efforts. The Russian war machine, it has many strengths and many weaknesses. Its strengths are the sheer size and the volume of the military forces it's able to put into the field. Firstly, its professional army, but also the fact that it's got a vast conscript pool, which on top of that was a vast amount of Soviet weaponry inherited from the USSR. It's also partnering very closely with China and with North Korea and Iran, sharing technology, sharing money, sharing resources for their own mutual benefit. The Russians have adapted to the fact that they aren't as strong as they thought they were. They thought the war would be over in 3 days. In the early days of the war, they sent their creme de la creme of the Russian armed forces to Ukraine, and they died in their thousands in vast convoys, either just north of Kyiv or in the east and south on the way to Kherson. They had to adapt by recruiting thousands more. They had to recruit people from abroad. They had to adapt their actual assaults, their ability to fight on the front line. They could no longer do combined arms warfare because of the lack of trained soldiers. And instead, they started the human meat wave assaults because that's all they're good for. And also just the level of despair for the Russian soldiers on the ground. I saw there was cases of Russian soldiers piling up dead bodies, essentially, literally piles of bodies. And people just being forced to do the most dreadful things by their own commanders, digging in the open. There was one position that, I don't know whose idea it was on the Russian side, they were digging a trench directly towards the Ukrainians in the hope that obviously they had tried going over the ground and running over the field, but they weren't making it, so they decided to just dig and go through the thing. But the trouble is there's still no cover. There's no tree lines. There's no branches of trees to stop the drones from hitting you. You've got a shovel in your hand. You're exhausting yourself trying to dig through that cold, hard earth, only to have an FPV after 5 hours of labor crash into you, and then you've got to then crawl back with either no legs or one leg back to a Russian position, which the vast majority of the time, their ability to treat their casualties effectively is really bad. It's terrible, in fact. We'd see bodies and also capture positions where we'd look at their IFAK kits, we'd look at their medical supplies, and they were utilizing ropes as tourniquets. They had this strange sort of 1980s sort of rubber band thing that they would tie around their legs. There was reports that they were bringing tampons to the front line, and they were being told to insert commercially bought tampons into their bullet wounds to stop the blood loss, which is ridiculous. It's just not going to treat you effectively. So Russia has gone to every depth of depravity you could possibly imagine in Ukraine. There's famous memes online of Russians running off with everything from toilets that they've looted to washing machines and refrigerators. And more than that, the Russians have obviously bombed entire cities to the ground, everything from Bakhmut to Mariupol. The targeting of civilians, hospitals, including hospitals that cater for children. And it makes you wonder, like, what are their tactics? What is the end goal of that? Is it worth fighting on if there's nothing left to inherit at the end of all of this? Broadly speaking, I would prefer to use a British military uniform, primarily for quality reasons more than anything else, and comfort. Also, I had a quite slim body armour, predominantly because of the fact that we were a reconnaissance unit. We had to squeeze through gaps in buildings. We had to run between thorn bushes and tree lines and all the rest of it. So I tried to keep my personal kit as close to my body as possible. I had a battle belt with magazines on. I only had a couple of magazines on my plate carrier, a couple of grenades. I did often have an assault pack, which I would go and fight with. My personal weapon initially was a AK-74, which was the standard issue for the 131st in the first month of my time with them. That would change to the Polish Grot, which is a sort of a NATO standard weapon. I customized it with a foregrip and red dot with a magnifier. I obviously had Russian or sort of former Soviet grenades mostly. The prized ones for the Ukrainians were the American and British ones, but the ones I always had were the Russian ones. In regards to sort of a secondary weapon for me personally was a grenade launcher, 40mm American-made single-shot grenade launcher. We sometimes would bring an RPG, a rocket-propelled grenade, which was a sort of former Soviet design, to the islands to hit buildings on the islands sometimes. But in regards to actually anti-tank, it was always NATO that would provide the best kits. NLAWs, Javelin, Mantador, I think it was Spanish-made. We'd also have drones as well that we'd bring with us. Those were reconnaissance drones predominantly. But when we became an FPV team, when we actually set up a drone team, we actually did deploy always with FPV-related kit, and that was always sort of batteries and controllers and signals equipment, also a number of drones to actually utilize the munitions themselves, the batteries. The vast majority of the time, we are light infantry. Obviously a knife as well, a knife constantly on my plate carrier. That's a habit I've always had since Syria. And a realization that you're going into an environment where you have to be self-sufficient, so enough food and water for however long you're going out for. Functionary and half-decent equipment was very common on the front line in Ukraine. But if you wanted the really decent thermal scope, if you wanted the very best drone that could be bought commercially, then oftentimes it is up to the military themselves or international volunteers to fundraise for that kit. I began doing things like buying drones for the units. I began buying anti-drone software and hardware to go on their vehicles. I also purchased and delivered vehicles to the battalion as well. And the best way to do that, to get the financing together, is not to rely on the Ukrainians to navigate the bureaucracy of the system, but instead go directly to my followers on social media. I suppose the third phase of my time in Ukraine, personally, was the shift from the south, from Kherson, to the east, to a place called Le Mans. It was the summer of 2023. and the Ukrainians were on the march. The Russians were desperate to stop them, and they were counterattacking. With us being in the south, a reconnaissance group that now specialized in drones, our help was needed. Suddenly we're fighting these waves of Russians coming in tank columns. And then we also saw the terrible casualties that the Russians were getting. But again, it was strangely distant, yet also intimate, because there's something very strange about loading up your car with FPV drones and reconnaissance drones, driving to the front line, but not going to the very, very front line, maybe coming a mile off the zero line, and then sending drones over, and you're targeting people, you're trying to blow them up. You can see them running around. For several more months, I was in the cold, snowy ground of eastern Ukraine with the drone team, doing my best to support them in getting as many drones to the front line as possible, and as many Russians sent home as possible as well. I was there as a protection team for the drone units, but also as a driver as well to get them in, also as the designated medic to try and help them if they got injured. Would set up laptops in these bunkers, would have big batteries for the power source, and would put up a little cable, sometimes tie it to a tree for the signals. And then we became observers, like sort of ghosts over the battlefield, either looking for targets or just keeping a constant eye. And again, the most abiding memory is just the fact that the number of kills increased rapidly from our time in the south. There was a lot more vehicles being destroyed. My time in Ukraine can be separated in different phases. My first phase was the pre-war phase, which was in February of 2022. When just a few weeks before the war started. The next phase was my time coming back to Ukraine as a humanitarian, training people in battlefield medicine. That was in sort of March to about sort of June time in 2022. The process of becoming an international volunteer is actually remarkably easy. Particularly in relation to Ukraine. Before the war, you could fly directly to Lviv on Ryanair. With the outbreak of the war, with the fact that the Russians were threatening to shoot down any aircraft in Ukraine airspace, the only way to get in was via the land border. And I drove across the border, and it was incredibly surreal to see the queues of people, vast queues, so long, in fact, that some people were abandoning their cars in the queue and just simply walking to the border. And the road into Kyiv and into Ukraine was completely empty. And that's the tried and tested route for most international volunteers who went to Ukraine. Most of them would go on to sign up in a place called Lviv. They'd join the army and they'd be sent off to camps. Very soon after my arrival, while I was on the ground in places like Kyiv, Lviv, Odessa, I was hearing reports of the terrible war crimes in places like Bucha and Irpin, of civilians being shot in the streets. And there I was on the ground, looking Ukrainians in the eye, meeting them, getting to know them as people. And then when I heard about the war crimes, I realized that the battlefield aid, the charitable work, was only tinkering on the edges. I knew and I felt the same sort of passion and the determination to stand alongside the Ukrainians that I felt when I went out to join the Kurds against the Islamic State. If I wanted to make a stand against Russia, if I wanted to really stand alongside the Ukrainians, I had to join the army. So that's exactly what I did. Looking in those early days, the international volunteers may have looked like a drag on the system because it was all hands to the pump in Ukraine. Everyone was trying to survive. Hundreds of thousands of people were turning up at recruitment centers. There was no capability for the Ukrainians to actually train their own people, let alone thousands of foreigners. But I don't see it that way. I see it that this was a burst of energy, human energy, goodwill, passion from the international community, including individual citizens going out to support Ukraine. As far as I'm concerned, you're not a hero just for turning up. You're a hero for what you do. And many people went and left, but a few stayed, learnt the language, learnt the culture, ingratiated themselves with the Ukrainians, and delivered capabilities to the Ukrainians early on that were actually really useful. I'm talking about things like battlefield medicine, the utilization of some of the weapons that were coming in from the West at the time. They were already familiar. Many of the former service people that joined were already familiar with these weapon systems. So I see them as a band of brothers who went out to support Ukraine in its hour of need, with a few crazy ones mixed in. There are many ways to categorize the international volunteers, and they came to do different things. Some joined the army, some came as simple volunteers. You also saw people with no military experience coming out to join the army. These are the sort of passionate ones, the ones that sort of heard Zelensky's call early doors, and they were sort of politically and ideologically motivated. I can't criticize these people because I'm one of those people. I didn't have any sort of conventional military experience when I went out to join the Kurds so many years ago. Many, quite frankly, shouldn't have been there at all. They might have been fleeing something in their home country, whether that's drink or drug abuse. They might see Ukraine as a place to prove themselves, I suppose, to gain some sort of respect from the people around them. There have been far worse people. And there was the terrible case of Dan Burke and several actually other gentlemen that were murdered by other international volunteers. So frankly, some very dangerous people have turned up as well. But they are far and few between. They often don't have the capacity to stay in Ukraine for the long term. But either way, all kinds of people did turn up in those early days, and it would take months and months for the Ukrainians to sort through them, find the gems, and deploy them effectively on the front line. The training that was given to the volunteers in those early days was very poor. And the organisation was very poor too. And there were some very early mistakes. One of the most noticeable and well known was a terrible attack on a base very close to Lviv that was housing international volunteers. Dozens of people were killed and injured in that attack because foreigners were tweeting, were using their mobile phones in a war zone, perhaps not, obviously naively, and the Russians were able to find the location of this base and strike it with long-range cruise missiles. Things would later change, whereby the international volunteers then became more organised. So after learning about the creation of the international volunteers, the international brigades in Ukraine, and knowing that it was going to have some teething problems, I deliberately kept away. So I joined directly with the Ukrainian army and signed my contract with the Ministry of Defence and not with the International Legion, primarily just because I wanted to stay away from foreigners and work directly with the Ukrainians. I had a medical test and a fitness test that I had to go through. Once I had been cleared for service by the MOD in Ukraine, I was then liable to be taken by any Ukrainian unit that wished to have me. Now, the international volunteers that I was with were determined to get to the 131st. And the 131st, as I said, was an elite regiment, a great regiment to get into. I was actually, of my little group, I had the least experience in terms of conventional military experience. But what appealed to me about the reconnaissance group that was fighting in the south, the 131st, was because it was light infantry. A lot of the work that they were doing was very similar to the work that I did with the YPG and SDF in Syria. Now, the SDF operated in things called tabors, which were about 40-man teams. And a tabor would ride around in soft-skin vehicles with no heavy weapons, just AK-47s with body armor, grenades. They would clear buildings, they would push through villages, through mountain ranges, you name it, we had to clear it all. And a lot of those experiences in Syria, fighting in Raqqa, in places like Manbij and Tel Hamas, it all lent itself to the work that I would later do for the Ukrainian military. We were a very aggressive unit. If we were told to do something, we were going to do it. Well, no matter the casualties, no matter how difficult it was, the risks involved, you just put your head down and just do it. As long as our radio guy could speak Ukrainian and our point man can speak Ukrainian, then we could actually operate very effectively. We had to be adaptable. We had to be able to protect ourselves, and the weapons that we chose to bring with us, from grenade launchers to anti-tank missiles to the heavy machine guns, the PKMs that we brought with us, all helped us become very self-reliant. There's a common misconception that international volunteers in Ukraine are mercenaries. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's simply not true. A mercenary, by definition, is a soldier, a trained soldier that sells his service for money. Now, international volunteers from Britain, America, France, etc., have all gone out to Ukraine to stand in solidarity with the local people. They get paid not a single penny more than any other Ukrainian does. We get the same benefits if we're injured, the same veteran benefits once we retire than any other soldier in Ukraine. The classic definition of a mercenary is the Wagner Group, which is the Russian mercenary group that fights in foreign countries, often destabilizing them and butchering and murdering and torturing local people, but also the thousands of people that have gone over to join the Russian army. Now, the Russian army is employing the most terrible tactics to encourage people, often from the sort of the third world, from developing countries where there is terrible poverty, to join them. And sometimes they're doing it through lies, saying that they've got a job in Moscow in a factory, but then they turn up, they're threatened with arrest or deportation, and suddenly they find themselves fighting in the Donbass. So as far as I'm concerned, we're just simply Ukrainian soldiers fighting alongside them. So there is a base salary, and that base salary is $500 a month. There is also a combat bonus, which brings your salary, your base salary, up to $2,000, or around $2,000 a month. Only a fool, as far as I'm concerned, would go to Ukraine looking for money. This is a good point, actually, to point out my two patches. This was the Vidmark group, or Vidmark, which is a local name. It means witcher, in fact, in Ukrainian. On the other side is my battalion insignia, and it's the traditional cross of Ukraine. The colours are red and black, and the logo, the motto, I should say, in Ukrainian, which is always forward. A lot of international volunteers collect patches. Just starting from the top, you've got the unit patch here, the 131st, here and here. These are my unit patches, the International Volunteer Unit of the 131st. And below that are things that I was given. Poroshenko, the former president of Ukraine, gifted me this patch. He also gave me this one. These are also unit patches from Ukrainian battalions that gifted them to me. And then next to that are sort of Syrian patches, I suppose you could say. This one of the YPG in Syria that fought against ISIS. Below that is Wagner Group, which is a patch taken from a dead Russian soldier. This one here and here are unit patches of the Russian military. I took these ones down in Kherson. So a lot of international volunteers will collect thousands of patches. Me, I only keep the ones that I earned or was given or I took from the enemy. My real name is Harry, but I go by Mesa Gifford. Mesa Gifford is a nom de guerre that I chose when I first went out to Syria way back in 2015. I did it because I went to fight against the Islamic State alongside the Kurdish people in that area, in the region. And obviously, the Islamic State were putting bounties on people's heads. They were, I was going to put a big bounty on my own head, particularly for the length of time that I fought there and the amount of political work I did out there. So it was very sensible to choose a name that was memorable, was something that the local people could pronounce, and something that was familiar to me. I like the name, so chose it. My journey from ordinary city worker, working in London with a girlfriend, with a partner and a flat in London, to suddenly fighting first in Syria and then obviously later in Ukraine and doing other things. It all began with the rise of the Islamic State, I suppose. Very early, way back in 2008, I went out to Zimbabwe to work for the MDC, the Movement for Democratic Change, against Robert Mugabe. And after a few years of work in the city, and then seeing the rise of what was going on in the Middle East with the region being torn apart, I suppose I started to remember what drove me when I was younger. First, I can write the one abiding memory that I can remember writing about for my book about Syria was this moment on a train when I picked up a newspaper and there was the title like I think it was Brave in the Face of Pure Evil or something. And it was a picture of a aid worker just about to have his head cut off. And I could have just joined a charity. I could have, again, fiddled around the edges of the problem in Syria, just like the rest of the world was doing. But instead, what angered me was the images of the Yazidi girls being burnt alive in cages, of being sold in slave markets. And I realized that if you believe in internationalism, if you believe in humanism, if you want to actually deal with something that is dreadful happening on the other side of the world, you are not just a hopeless spectator. You have agency. You have the ability to say, no, I'm going to go out, I'm going to do something here, I'm going to draw attention to this issue, and I'm going to do the very least I can do, which, as far as I'm concerned, and this is the least I do, picking up a weapon, any fool can do. I have skirted, it is very controversial even from a legal perspective, but I've always abided by the law, the British law, and it's something that I know is worthwhile and good. One of my biggest strengths has always been to use my privilege as a British person to articulate the cause that I'm supporting. The war zones that we go to and the causes we get involved with, they are toxic environments that play havoc on mental and emotional health. One of the ways that I've kept myself safe is the fact that I always have a plan. And that is I compartmentalize my time in the countries that I support. I'm going for a reason. There's always something that I'm doing. I'm going to set up a medical program. I'm going to be doing certain advocacy work, whether it's writing articles or whether it's speaking in parliaments or meeting whoever, major players and decision makers in certain quarters. If I can do all of that and it's quantifiable, it could be written down and articulated, then again, it gives me purpose, it gives me focus. But if you don't have that mentality and you're just waiting to see what happens, or the grass is always greener, or you're running from something from home, your problems will catch up with you eventually. And in a war zone, and with the stresses that you're under as well, you're not going to find salvation. It's a very dark and difficult place. I've lost so many people that I've known over these more than a decade of fighting and working in various conflict zones. There was one incident in Raqqa when myself and two other guys crossed a road, and there was a machine gun at the end of the road, an ISIS machine gun, and they shot left to right. I was the third guy on the end. And they shot and killed the first two guys. They actually shot me as well. They hit my body armor, and I was flung to the ground and I crawled off the road. But I survived. And as I said, it's pure chance whether or not you live or die sometimes. That's not always the case. There's a famous saying that I've never forgotten, which is, how do you get so lucky? The more I train, the luckier I get. It's kind of like that too. The more you experience of war, the more you experience of the terrible things that can happen to you, it helps you to survive. Oftentimes, I've seen a lot of guys die because they underestimated the enemy. They didn't know exactly what it was like to fight. And a lot of guys I met in Ukraine, a lot of them are former service people too, who had never. A lot of them hadn't fought in particularly difficult environments in the past, and they sort of came to the conflict zone thinking it was going to be the same, much of the same, and then they would die because they didn't take cover that time, because they thought, the Russians never do this, the Russians never do that, and then the one time the Russians do what you have always said that they weren't going to do is the day that you die. My time in Ukraine ended just before Christmas in 2023. My father was very unwell, and sadly, within a month of me returning home, passed away. And it gave me a new perspective on what I was doing in Ukraine. And largely, I'd completed much of what I wanted to achieve. I was still able to raise $100,000 for the Ukrainian military in that time. But I also started to remember that there were other causes as well that I wanted to support. In the news recently has been things like the conflict in Syria is hot topic. The Donald Trump presidency. There's a lot going on in the world, and I am not going to rush anywhere. I'm going to focus on myself, my family, come up with a clear plan, a clear goal, and I'm going to choose my next mission. So one of the things that's kept me sane since I left Ukraine has been my writing. It helped me so much when I left Syria all those years ago. I wrote a book called Fighting Evil, which came out in 2020. I did start writing a book, an account of my time in Ukraine. But actually, one thing I've always enjoyed and always been intrigued about is writing fiction. So one of the things I've been doing over the last few months is writing a fiction book about Ukraine and about the war against Russia. At the same time, I was able to come back with a huge amount of footage, just by the nature of this conflict, it being the most filmed war probably of all time. I think putting that together into a really compelling documentary, into something that will tell the story of the international volunteers, that will tell the story of Ukraine through the eyes of people who have gone out to support them, would be a really good thing. If I am to build a life after this, and whatever life that might be, it would be good to go back to my old name, which is just simply Harry. Harry from England.
My name is Jonathan Taylor. In 2011, I took one of the longest sniper shots in Marine Corps history. This is everything I'm authorized to tell you. You find yourself always living in an elevated sense of alertness. I personally did suffer from PTSD. You come home within a week, now you're back at your kitchen table with your family back home, and you're going right back into daily life. It's a difficult transition. People ask me, how does it feel to shoot someone, or it can't feel good to shoot someone? My answer to that is no, it's not hard to shoot someone at all. It's actually, for me, it's just like shooting a target. The only thing that's different to me is there's a big psychological effect if you miss, and there's a big psychological effect if you wound and they get away. If you take a sniper shot and you miss, and they know they were shot at by a Marine sniper, and you missed them, they can now use that for propaganda. They can feel their chest puffed up. Marine snipers can't shoot. I got shot at by a sniper, he didn't hit me. If you engage an enemy combatant and you wound them and they get away, now you've definitely created an enemy who can now walk around saying, I got shot by a Marine sniper, but I'm fine. But now I'm gonna do everything I can to hunt down and kill Marine snipers. I can confidently say that I've always used my good moral compass to make sure that I'm doing the right thing. And that is, having positive ID of a weapon, or hostile act, hostile intent. Those three things are a must-have if you're going to try to engage anyone. When we would do these missions and we'd have enemy kills and things, it was never talked about. We would come back and the mission was over and, hey, did you kill it? Yeah, I think we killed a couple guys, and then that was it. Unless you actually could physically touch the body, which you never can as a sniper, and also, the Afghan and Iraqi, the people that we were in combat against, they take their bodies immediately and get them out of there. So it's very rare that you even find a body left over. And the way you know you got a confirmed kill is the funeral the next couple of days. Our interpreter would have friends in the market. They would say, hey, you remember that engagement over there when you were in Building 91 and you shot the 5 guys? They just have 5 funerals this week. That's all those guys. Most of the time you try to insert under the cover of darkness. So we insert at night. We insert about usually 1, 2 a.m., 3 a.m. That way you can make your movement to your position, get set in before the sun comes up, get everything staged, get your security set up, make sure you can see what you're trying to observe, get your radio up, make sure you got comm going and those types of things. And then as soon as the sun comes up, you're on alert. You're observing the pattern of life in the area. When you're on a mission, especially a 3-day mission, a lot of times you're usually not in a good, comfortable position for those 3 days because there's not a lot of terrain to work with. A lot of times what we're doing is IED interdiction, so explosive device interdiction. So the bad guys would dig holes on the side of the road, put these bombs in, explosives and wait for trucks to come and blow them up. So insert yourself into an area to where you can get good eyes on and observe that intersection where multiple IEDs have been placed. There's not a lot of ways to disguise yourself, so what we'd have to do is we would have to dig holes just a few inches down, and then we would take rocks and other stuff around us, bushes, and kind of place them around it so that it didn't look like a giant hole. And we would make a little lane in there so that we could have our gun, our scope, and observe, a little observation post. Sometimes we would take occupied houses where people lived in them, families lived in them, because they had a certain window on the second floor that had good eyes on this certain intersection in the town we wanted to see. That was always a weird feeling, going into somebody's house that's occupied at 2 in the morning, knocking on the door, knocking on the window, and you just hold your pistol up and be like, you know, we're coming in. And they got no choice. We would tell the family basically, hey, you know, you can move around your house, do your day-to-day business. You just can't leave the confinements of your compound while we're there. After the first couple times doing that, I realized it was very difficult with the language barrier. And we never had an interpreter really assigned to us in Iraq. Afghan, we did a lot. Basically, I wrote out on a notepad like an entry statement for these houses. And it said, hey, you know, we are U.S. Marines. We're going to use your house for a mission. We'll be here no longer than the mission requires. We will treat you with respect. Please treat us with respect. Please bring us any weapons or ammunition or cell phones that you may have. If you have sick or wounded, please let us know. And that was about it. I put that on a piece of paper and had it written in Arabic. I had compassion for the local civilians. It wasn't their fault. You know, they weren't the enemy. So we tried to treat them with as much respect as we could. Being a sniper in a combat situation, you can definitely find yourself in some crazy situations. Very dirty situations. One time in particular, we needed to get eyes on this one section of a road, and it was right in the outskirts of this village. And the only covered position that we could get was this, beside this little house, there was a small little sheep shed, really small though. But I had a 4-man team, and we were like, we got nowhere to go. It's 3 in the morning. We've been walking around trying to find a spot. Last thing we could find before the sun came up was that shed. We made a little pile of hay through a hay bale, and when we removed all the hay out of the ground to make us a flat spot where we could lay down and sleep, there was just maggots, just layer after layer, years of sheep and active maggots. We try to get rid of what you can, but there's nothing you can do. That is very common for a sniper mission, to be in those kind of spots. Or even if it's cold, you know, a lot of times, especially if you're near a river, you're trying to observe, you're going to have to be in a really crappy spot that's probably going to get you wet. You don't want to be on the side of the beach. You have to be hidden, so you get in the reeds, you get into like a little wash, and disguise yourself in that. And if you're sitting in that for 2 or 3 days and it's 30, 40 degrees, 20 degrees outside, you know, that can be a toll on you too, take a toll. So it goes from both extremes, to extreme cold to extreme hot, to living in or living in a swamp, or, I mean, it's bad. But anywhere, usually the worst places on earth is where you're going to find the snipers. So the average loadout for a 4-man sniper team during Operation Iraqi Freedom, and this was my team, would have your team leader, your assistant team leader, your radio operator, and your security guy / machine gunner. Everybody would have at least 6 liters plus of water. We would have food to sustain ourselves for 3 to 4 days, and we would have extra of everything. I would have my sniper rifle, and that would be T-boned across my ruck. I would have an M4, and I would also have a pistol. And that's what I would carry. I would carry extra batteries to help the radio guy out, and I would carry extra ammo just in case. I would have at least 6 magazines of ammo on my chest, including 1 or 2 frag grenades, a pyro pop-up for signals, and that's about it for my loadout. For the assistant team leader, very similar loadout. He would carry usually just an M4 and anything that we need as far as like to observe, so binoculars, spotting scope, night vision, those types of things. And then our RTO, our radio guy, he would carry 1 or 2 radios, sometimes 2, always at least 1 with extra batteries, and then his own personal loadout as well. Our machine gunner, our last guy, security guy, He would carry usually a claymore, which is a explosive device. He would also carry his machine gun and extra ammo, and also help carry extra batteries for the radio guy. The average weight of a scout sniper's pack on a mission, a combat mission, is 65 pounds, I would say, average. And then on top of that, you've got your full combat loadout. So you've got your flak jacket with your armor, your magazines, plus all your guns. So it gets really heavy. It's probably 80 to 100 pounds per person that you're carrying. So one of the most, I guess, well-known items in a scout sniper's arsenal is his ghillie suit. You take a pair of utilities, your regular clothes, camo, and you attach netting, you attach burlap, you attach things to conceal yourself and camouflage yourself. When we build a ghillie suit for camouflage, we usually always build it out of your desert uniform, which is your light colors, your light brown, tans. Because once you get that dirty, it starts getting brown, and you can kind of make that blend in any environment. At that point, it's just based off of what environment are you going to be in. You can use the same ghillie suit because you've got your netting on the back and your burlap, you're able to use that burlap to tie in vegetation. In Afghanistan, if you're out, in the farmlands and near the wadis and the rivers, and then you can use all the tall grasses and things like that and stick them all over you and tie them to you, and you can be very concealed. Very rarely did we wear a ghillie suit in Iraq. We mostly tried to use the terrain to disguise us as much as we could. One thing that gets difficult is if you're on a 3-day mission and you're laying there in a hole in the desert and you've got nothing protecting you from the sun, all your water leaves you very quickly. You get dehydrated very quickly. We'd order tan bed sheets online, have family ship them to us. We'd spray paint them different colors, and then we'd take them and make a mud hole out by our patrol base, and we'd just dump them in the mud, cover them in mud, put them in the creek, get them as dirty as we can, dry them out. And now we've got, it looks like the natural terrain shade cover. So then from there, we could take like just your average tent pole that snaps together. We could take those, we could figure out ways to rig them to maybe give us a little canopy, stick it in the hole, and we can all lay down under it. So now we've got cover from the sun, but we're also covered from people seeing us. You get creative, especially when you get hot. It's not fun laying there, 110 degrees. The most coveted item that we have as a scout sniper it's called a hog's tooth. Especially when you're active duty. I think I never took mine off when I was active, and now I only wear it for special occasions basically, but I have mine on today. I mean, basically what it is it's the projectile from a .308 round or bullet. Your hog's tooth is a necklace that every scout sniper gets presented to them when they graduate sniper school. And it's your prized possession. A lot of snipers never take it off, and this is the actual round that we shoot at sniper school and that we train with. You hold it close to your heart. The lore behind it, there's a couple different stories, but the one that I go with and most people go with is this is the enemy's last round. So this is the round that was meant for you that didn't strike you. As long as you have this round around your neck, you're invincible. So in 2011, I was a sniper team leader. Call sign was Shogun of our platoon. I was a senior sniper in the platoon. We had a very stacked platoon with a lot of experience. Everybody had multiple deployments. That platoon was full of studs. This was in Marja. Afghanistan is in the Helmand province. We had all the aerial operation to the east of the town. There was a lot of enemy activity, and they would kind of come in and out of Marja through this area. It was like no man's land. Anytime you reached a certain grid line on the east of the city, you would start getting engaged every time. The reason that area was so protected by the enemy is because that's where they had a lot of their poppy, opium, and marijuana facilities going. So the whole mission was that Afghani army and Afghani police were going to do a north to south clearing operation, methodically locating and burning down marijuana fields, poppy fields, all the way down. What we were assigned to do was to insert 2 or 3 days ahead of the main operation to a building on the most eastern part of the village to observe the pattern of life and report on any activity we've seen in that area. The morning of, as our vehicles were staging to start coming and pushing through, we could see multiple motorcycles full of guys coming in, 2 or 3 guys on each motorcycle. The way they operate in that area, anytime they're going for an attack, they wear all black. And as the Afghani army and Afghani police start pushing south and burning out these fields, these enemy guys start coming up and staging in this one little area of this village to start harassing them. My team is reporting on this from a building. They can't see us. They don't know we're there. We're over 2,000 yards away. And we can see what looks like to be weapons, but we can't really tell. At this time, I'm on the spot and scope observing. And my teammate, he is actually on the 50 cal. I'm trying to get him walked on to the distance just in case we need to take a shot. We realize that it's over 2,000 yards, which is past the max effective range of the M107 50 cal. It's the Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle. Over 2,000, 2,200 is the max effective range. So we knew that this was going to be a difficult shot if we had to take it. We do all the math, we get everything figured out. I'm reporting, I'm telling the CO, I'm like, hey, we've got these guys, they look shady, they're doing something. I haven't got positive ID yet. And he's like, if you get positive ID of any weapons or hostile act, hostile intent, you fire at will. We're getting ready. All of a sudden, here it goes. The guy jumps up on the berm right behind this wall. All of a sudden, we seen RPG clear as day. He shot RPG north towards the Afghan army guys and Afghan police. And I screamed, RPG, he's got an RPG. And then the CO was like, fire. So I told Nixon, he was like, where should I hold? He's like, I've got the elevation maxed out because it's past the max effective. I'm like, just hold as low as you can. Hold the last mil dot and fire. He took a shot and it hit in the desert. It was like 300 yards short, roughly 300 yards short. Cody was like, yeah, I don't know how to hold to hit him properly because he wasn't a school trained sniper. He was a very good Marine, very good sniper platoon Marine or teammate, but he wasn't a school trained sniper. So I said, okay, let me get on the gun. I did my own calculation in my head and did a mill hold, which is, it's a technique that you use to do a hold instead of actually cranking the actual data on your scope for elevation. You can just hold. I did my mill hold, and when I determined I was about at the spot I needed to take the shot, I was actually looking at a cloud. So my crosshairs were basically holding on a cloud. I couldn't see the guys at all. That's how high I was. And I said, okay, Nixon, I'm about to fire a shot for reference. Tell me where I hit. So I shot, and boom, hit the wall right beside these guys. And it just hits it. You see the flash, just bang. You got it. Wherever you're holding, stay there. So they all start kind of walking kind of fast. And as soon as they peeked from the cover of that wall, I had my spot where I was holding, right in the middle of the wall, and I dropped in the tire nine rounds. Boom, 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 boom. Dust, flash. You couldn't see anything after that. And the reason that there's such a big flash is because the round that we shoot is this is a replica of a 50 caliber sniper round. And the round that we shoot is actually called a Rothfuss round. It is kind of like an explosive tip round. It's got a tungsten penetrator inside of it, and then it's also filled with zirconium particles. Zirconium particles is like incendiary. It lights up, burns. These projectiles have that in them. So it's designed to engage light armor vehicles, really, to shoot into the engine block of a truck and then light on fire. But we use these, it's basically all the rounds we had was Rothfuss rounds. So the good thing about Rothfuss rounds, they do some damage. Secondly, it's easy to see and spot your shots because it explodes, there's a flash. So we could see that flash hitting right in their bodies, and there's nowhere they could go. Called it in, I'm reporting all this right to the CO as it's happening. A few minutes later, there was no more activity from those guys. What we do is a battle damage assessment, right? So a squad of infantry will go out after you make a sniper kill, do an assessment. So they'll look and see if there's any dead bodies or what there was, what shooting positions they were set up in. So they called me on the radio like, hey, yeah, JT, man, we see blood everywhere. There's bloody clothes, bloody blankets, bloody everything. Chunks of flesh. So these guys definitely didn't survive. The distance was 26 meters, over 2,600 yards. I knew it was I knew it was a long engagement. I haven't heard of anybody at that point ever engaging anybody that far. But at the time, you don't think about it as far as a scout sniper is really concerned. There's things that are taboo that people don't like to talk about, longest kills and things like that. That's why I never came out with it for a long time. And I encourage anybody else out there that if they have stories like that, sniper stories, share your stories. People don't know what they don't know, and we're trying to honor the legacy, honor the impact that we've left on the battlefield. Every Marine sniper that'll come out and tell their stories helps us preserve that history. To be a Marine Scout Sniper in the Infantry Battalion, it's voluntary. What they do is just about every year or after every deployment, they'll hold indocs, indoctorations. Basically, it's a tryout. So out of most indocs, say 25 guys show up. And these are probably, more than likely, they're some of your best, the top tier guys in the infantry battalion that come out for these. It all starts with the gear list, the first day at check-in for the indoc. 05 in the morning, everybody lay their stuff out. And if you're missing one item on that list, you pack your stuff and you go home. That's it. Have to have attention to detail. If you can't make attention to detail to try out, you're not going to make it. After that gear list, the guys then pack their rucks up and we do a physical fitness test. So 3-mile run, max set of pull-ups, and max set of crunches. Do that, as long as they score high first class, then they're good. And we had 2 logs between us, and water jugs, and MREs, and everything that we needed to sustain ours. When I say MREs, I mean that's your food, your box of food. It's meals ready to eat, that's what they're called. They're not very delicious, but they have all the nutrients you need. And they would hike those logs with all their gear out to the training area, which is about 5 miles. And there's the snipers in the platoon. The senior snipers are running around, yelling at you, pulling you out of formation, making you do stuff, getting back in formation, the whole 5 miles. And when you get to the training area, first thing you do is you set up all the tents and set the camp up. And then from there, it's basically nonstop for about 10 days of just hell on earth. They're going to treat you like for 10 days straight. Very little sleep, little food, and test all of your infantry knowledge. Out of the 25 in my indoc, 7 finished it without quitting, and they kept 6 of us for the platoon. So it's a pretty high attrition rate for the indoc alone. But those 6 guys, you're all really tight now because you all just went through something very hellacious together. To this point in my life, that could have been the hardest 10 days I did. 'Cause my feet were destroyed, I was bleeding through my boots. It was pretty rough. The next step in your journey, you join a platoon, you get assigned a team, you start feeling your way out in a team, finding your niche, and then once you're ready and your platoon thinks you're ready, they try to get you a spot to sniper school. Those spots are very coveted. The attrition rate for sniper school is about 65% historically. The school altogether is 11 weeks, so it's a long time. You're buddied up with somebody, you got a buddy partner, a shooter spotter, that's how we operate. You're with that guy 24/7, he's attached to your hip. So everywhere you go, you're together. If you fail, he fails. If you're in trouble, he's in trouble. So you better hope you got a good partner. You go right into the first phase, which is land navigation. Land navigation is the first gradable event that can drop you. It's very difficult, and basically what you're doing is you're using a map and a compass, and you're trying to locate a tent stake that's in the ground, and on that stake has a dog tag. And you're trying to find that in a dense wooded swamp area. So it's very difficult to find. You have to find so many in a certain number of hours to be able to say you passed. So that gets a couple of people usually from sniper school off the bat. And then after that, you go into the second phase, where you start learning your marksmanship. Whenever it comes a time that you have to make a shot, it is the most important because you can't miss. Then you go into your field skills. That's when you're learning how to do what we call observation exercises. So basically you lay down and you have your spot and scope, your binos. The instructors place 10 to 12 military items out in the area somewhere, in the field or wherever. You have to lay there in the prone and try to identify those items. It can be as small as a bullet, AP brush that you use to clean your gun with. It can be a magazine clip. It's a skill that you're learning, a skill set to get you used to observing what we call the baseline. The baseline is everything as it is in its natural state, right? So as a sniper, you have to be trained to notice changes in the baseline. The next thing that we learn is called stalking, camouflage and concealment. Stalking is the #1 phase of sniper school that people get dropped for. It's the hardest part. You put your ghillie suit on, you camouflage up, and they take you out to an area. They determine a left lateral limit and a right lateral limit. At one end, they'll park a truck with 2 instructors on the top in chairs with binoculars, and they're observing that whole area. We call it a stalk lane. And all the snipers are in what we call the veg line. The whole purpose of the stalk is to make your way concealed within 200 meters, 200 yards of the observers on the truck, set up a shooting position, and take a well-aimed shot at the truck. We use blanks, and then be able to report and observe on what they're doing. There's walkers out there that are walking around to help the observers try to locate you. Once you make it through stalking, you are kind of at the finish line. It's really yours to lose at this point. Now you're in the mission planning and execution phase. And this phase is where they're actually assembling you into sniper teams and teaching you how to run missions. They'll set up a command post in the office there with the radios. You'll get mission checkpoints, and you'll patrol out to your checkpoints. You'll get observation spots where you're supposed to observe a target. You'll stay out there for a couple of days doing that, reporting information back, just like you would in the combat. You'll get compromised sometimes and have to evade or break contact and run 2 miles and set up in another spot. They play with you a lot, play games with you. The whole final phase is just teaching you how to develop and write a 5-paragraph order, we call it, which is basically like your mission plan. How to brief that properly, how to build a terrain model that shows and illustrates what you're doing, and to be able to articulate and brief that to a command. Once you pass that, you're basically good. By then, it's you're at the 11th week. Now you're a basically trained scout sniper. You still don't know everything for sure, but now you know how to at least carry yourself and operate and run a team in a combat zone. A lot of different things go into becoming a good long-range marksman. There's things that you have to take into account that you wouldn't have to take into account for, say, your average hunter or average sport shooter. You have to take into encounter the atmospherics, like what's going on in the air, the barometric pressure, humidity, your temperature. All of these little things affect the bullet's flight, especially if you're doing like high angle type shoots, like shooting from an angle high to low, like shooting off a mountain or building, or shooting low to high. Then you have to start getting into some serious math, like the Pythagorean theorem, algebra, different things like that. Also, when you're shooting angles, you're dealing with cosine indicator. It can be a lot to take in to a new sniper. When I went through school, we were doing everything manually. So all of our calculations and our formulas, you have to memorize a lot of formulas. To calculate your wind, there's a certain formula. To calculate your distance to the target, there's a different formula. And what we had is we had these, we called them a sketchbook. In the sketchbook, we had a calculator, we had protractors, we had anything that we needed for marksmanship. We had it all lined out in there. All your dopes was like your elevation for your gun. Every gun shoots a little different. So at certain distances, if you want to hit a target at 600 yards, it may be 3.2 that you have to turn on your elevation. His gun, it may be 3.4. To get those, you have to shoot a lot to get your data and collect your data. You have to collect data at different temperatures because your dopes aren't going to be the same at first thing in the morning at 50 degrees as they are in mid-afternoon at 80 degrees. The trajectory of the round is going to be different. It's going to fly different. All those atmospherics start having effect. The modern snipers, everything is computerized and there's a trick for everything and a gadget for everything. So a lot of those skills are fleeting. Those are skills that are very perishable, and if you don't practice them, you will definitely forget them. So I'm glad that I learned that way, the proper way, and actually sitting there and writing out formulas. I come from a very rural area in Mississippi. There's not a lot of opportunities. You either become a cop, you work construction, or you go to the military. I tried college first, didn't work. And after 9/11, I was actually in my barracks room watching the TV when the planes hit the tower. And from that moment on, I knew that I wanted to serve in some capacity. So when I went to boot camp, I was 20. So I was a little older than the average recruit. It wasn't difficult, it was just frustrating. You're gone from home for the first time, no phones, so you're just communicating via letter, back and forth with your family. And they just play with you mind games all day. Once you get out of boot camp, that's when your training really starts. If you sign up to be infantry in the Marine Corps, after boot camp, you go to what they call SOI, School of Infantry. Infantry school is where you really start learning how the Marine Corps works, how to be tactically proficient, how to do your job, how to get ready for combat. It's more difficult than boot camp because it's a lot more physical and you're out in the field a lot, but you also have more freedoms. You can have your cell phone, you can go off on the weekends. Everybody does the first couple weeks together, basic training, and then they can break you down into infantry specialties, MOS specialties. So you can either be a machine gunner, an assaultman, or mortarman. So I did machine gun course at SOI, and it was difficult. You're humping those big guns, the tripods, all the ammo, with the disassembly and assembly of the guns, and having to learn the processes really quick. It was a challenge. And then after infantry school, of course, then you get your orders to your unit. We call it the fleet. And once you get to the fleet, that's when all the fun begins. When I went to the fleet, I went to 1-2, 1st Battalion, 2nd Marines. And it was pretty crazy and surreal checking into the fleet for the first time. The first day when they dropped us off, after we graduated SOI, and they dropped us off at our battalion, it was like The Walking Dead. I mean, guys had just got back from deployment in Iraq. So you've seen guys walking around the barracks with burns, amputees, people on crutches, a lot of disgruntled Marines. It wasn't a good scene to walk into as a young PFC or private. It was a shocker then. I can imagine how it's changed now with there not being an active war going on, but it was an awakening. My first ever deployment, I was a machine gunner. I deployed with the 22nd MU, Marine Expeditionary Unit, and we traveled across the Mediterranean on ship, and we went into Iraq for about 90 days, a little more. As soon as we got into Iraq, a lot of action. By the time my second deployment, I went to sniper school, and I was a sniper team leader. My third deployment, I was also a sniper team leader. We went to Iraq, and it was in 2009. And then my Afghanistan deployment, 2011, that was my final deployment, and one of my most active deployments. Operating as a scout sniper in a combat zone for as many deployments as I did, and as much as a high tempo as our deployment cycles were, you find yourself always living in an elevated sense of alertness, right? It really gets difficult at times to turn that off. I didn't really notice it as much until my latter deployments, when I got a little older too, I think. You've been on high alert, running back-to-back missions in an austere environment with the enemy for 6 months straight. You come home, within a week, now you're back at your kitchen table with your family back home, and you're going right back into daily life. When I noticed it was at night when I go to sleep. When things would get quiet, I wanted my security there with me. Because when I'm asleep in Afghanistan or Iraq, I can go to sleep comfortably knowing that these guys on my team got my back, and they got guns. And if anything happens, they're going to wake me up. When it's just you, you feel alone, even if you have a family. You still got your family there with you, but now it's all on you. You're the team leader and you're the only security at home. When I would first get back from some of my deployments, I would go through a phase to where I couldn't sleep hardly at all. The only way I could sleep is if I had a weapon in arm's reach. I would even practice, like going to bed, laying down, reaching and grabbing my gun. All right, yeah, it's right there. Wait, I'm left-handed. I need to turn this way. Wait, I don't like to make sure the trigger's here so I can just pull it up and shoot. And then if I didn't have a gun, it was a knife or something. But I'd always want to have it at arm's reach. And any little sound, in the middle of the night, I would wake up like I was on a mission and immediately grab my weapon, clear the house, walk outside of the house, go all around the house, come back in and go right back to sleep. You write it off as like, oh, this is what adults do. It's what grown men do. They're protecting their family. You hear a sound, you go and look at it, and you go check the house. But the average father at home doesn't need a gun at arm's reach at all times. So that's one thing. And I think that leads into, especially if you've done a career or spent a long amount of time in this type of environment, in this type of job field, it's very hard to transition and turn it off completely. Out of my teams that I deployed with, we never had a sniper KIA'd out of my group. I have multiple friends, snipers from other units that went and deployed with other units that were KIA. The most loss of life that I've experienced throughout my military career is Marines taking their own lives. And I can confidently say that there's at least probably 20 that I've been connected with in some way, whether they were in my battalion, my unit, served with them, knew them. When you're already dealing with transition issues, and you're already dealing with PTSD and depression, and feeling that lack of belonging again, and you're surrounded by death. I personally did suffer from PTSD, and the only way that I was able to address that was finally being able to talk to someone and admit it and reach out for help. I came back from Afghanistan with some injuries. A lot of stuff that I had already been compiling on me. I was slotted for recruiting school, what you call flagged. So at a certain point in your career, the Marine Corps will flag certain individuals to serve in other billets that are on behalf of the Marine Corps. It was almost like I was out of the military now. I had transitioned from being an operating sniper to being a recruiter. And I was now living with my family full time, dealing with the day-to-day family issues and just life issues. I hadn't been used to that. And we weren't used to spending all of our time together either. So we were growing apart. And we were in serious financial trouble. One thing that made it difficult for me on recruiting duty is that at this point in my life, I was not very happy with the Marine Corps and wasn't really a believer. It was difficult for me to sell something I wasn't really fully believing in anymore. Of course, I was proud to be a Marine, I was proud to be a sniper, proud of everything I did, proud of our legacy, proud of everything, but it was a difficult transition. When I got to recruiting duty, there was already word of recruiters having a high rate of taking their own life. Before I arrived, there had been one a couple months before. And then when I was there, my first 6 months, we had 2 or 3 other recruiters take their life. So I was already having these issues. I already knew numerous people that had taken their own life. I already had one of my good friends do it on the phone with me. Everywhere I turned, I was seeing death. And then the final straw was our direct boss took his own life. And there's only 3 of us in this office. So we were tight. I literally kind of had a breakdown and went and told the sergeant major of the recruiting station what was going on. And she said, hey, let's go talk to the CO and we're going to send you to Wounded Warrior Battalion. Take care of any things that you need to take care of, and you can make up your mind if you want to stay in or get out or whatever at this point. So that's what I did. And I relocated, got myself taken care of, dealt with all my demons, got a divorce, and started my whole life over in 2013. Upon my transition out of the Marine Corps, I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. I'd always want to be in law enforcement, but I could see myself going back to my hometown in Mississippi and just dying there. I decided I was going to take a year off professionally before I made any decisions career-wise and just go travel. So I went out to Wyoming, lived out there, worked on a ranch for a little while as a ranch hand and herding cattle and sheep up to the Bighorn Mountains, and did a little bit of everything. Worked for the oil fields, got my CDL, started driving trucks, hauling sand for oil rigs. And at one point, I realized, okay, mentally I'm fine. I'm ready to start getting a good career. And I want a family. My Wounded Warrior case manager had emailed me and said, hey, there's this amazing program in DC that you'd be a great fit for. It's called the Warriors to Workforce Acquisition Program. It's a 3-year paid internship program with the VA that brings you in with a cohort of other wounded vets. You get professional development classes, all the training and certificates you need to be a contracting officer or a procurement specialist for the government, and you also get your bachelor's degree in business. I called, interviewed, got accepted, and moved out to Frederick, Maryland, where the course was, and then finished that course. I met my wife while I was there. I randomly got a call from the president of the Scout Sniper Association at the time, and they had nominations coming up for board of directors, and he was looking for some guys. He asked me if I'd be interested. He's like, but I got at least 5 or 6 emails from people vouching for you, saying that you'd be good. Once he told me that, I'm like, oh, well, I need to take this opportunity to utilize that. And, I've always had a strong natural ability to lead. So I decided I would jump on the board for SSA, and within a couple months, I was offered to be the vice president, COO. The president at the time had to step down, and he offered me to take over as president. We are the only nonprofit association for Marine Scout snipers in the world. We're established in 1998, and we provide support services for Marine snipers and their families. If you have mental health issues, we have a connection with the VA, who is a physician. Attorneys that we can link you up with that can help you with legal issues that you may be going through. Out of all the things I've been through, ups and downs, all my combat deployments, the loss of life I've seen and been around, I wouldn't take anything back for what I've been through, because if anything would have changed in any way, I wouldn't have the current life that I have today, with the current family I have today. And truly, I could not imagine myself being in a better position. I would have never imagined growing up when I was a little poor kid in Mississippi having the life and the family that I have now. So I'm very grateful.
My name is Brian Kastner. I'm a former explosive ordnance disposal officer. Since leaving the Air Force, I travel around the world to conflict areas to investigate war crimes, and this is everything I'm authorized to tell you. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan were IED wars, improvised munitions, improvised devices. You just had to assume that there was a bomb somewhere at your feet that you had not found yet. The work is tough. I mean, anyone who does this work can't say that they're not affected by it. You would be inhuman to not be affected by it. The joke about cutting the red wire. It's funny how consistent it is. Obviously, the wire colors have absolutely no correspondence to absolutely anything. But no, you don't cut the red one. You actually don't cut any of them. The biggest misconception of Hollywood when it comes to EOD is this idea that you have to be crazy to do the work, and that the people doing the work and working with explosives are somehow off in some way. That perception is pervasive. It's even all the way, to the Hurt Locker, which won the Academy Award to have EOD be a subject of a film of, with that stature on the one hand is incredible. And on the other, it makes us look like reckless cowboys with a death wish, which could not be further from the truth. So the drama of the film is this increasingly risky behavior and this idea that, of taking any risk, not having a sense of self-preservation. The first couple minutes of the film of an actual EOD operation is correct. That said, everything in between the first few minutes and the last few minutes is Hollywood and makes a good movie. I think maybe something that the public doesn't understand about the EOD profession is the amount of time we spend memorializing and remembering everyone that we've lost. So we have the EOD Warrior Foundation that raises money for the children of men and women that we've lost in all wars. We have a memorial wall down in Florida. So you go to school, to EOD school, every day, passing the wall of all of the names of every man and woman who has died in the line of duty from World War II through to today. And so when there's a representation in the public of EOD being risky, cavalier, cowboys, there's maybe an association or an implication or something that there's so many people with their name on the wall who died in combat because they were that way, that they were risky, that they, just did whatever and weren't paying attention. And it couldn't be further from the truth. I first deployed to Iraq at the end of 2004. I went to Balad Air Base, which is just north of Baghdad. I did one tour there. And then I went back to Iraq in Kirkuk for 2006, and then did a tour there. And I mean, this sounds so naive now, but I was excited. And I was excited because I had been training for years to do a thing, and now I was finally going to be able to do that thing. And that's a very, 27-year-old's version of looking at that. So I was the flight commander of the EOD unit. A flight is roughly equivalent to a company, and we were there to support 1st Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division. And so as the equivalent of the company commander, I'm going to have a chief who's my number 2. We're going to have an ops center, and then we're going to have a number of teams, and a team is 3 people, and they're going to be divided out either to different FOBs, forward operating bases, or they're going to be assigned to route clearance packages. The route clearance teams are basically combat engineers with EOD assigned, whose whole job it was just to drive the highways and get blown up, or hopefully not get blown up, but find the device and take it apart. And so they would just drive the highway before the logistics movements would go to be able to clear that out. And then we had emergency response teams, quick reaction teams, QRF, quick reaction force teams, however you want to call it, a couple in Kirkuk, and then some at the outlying FOBs. IEDs, improvised explosive devices, are just that. They are put together by a bomber, a bit of wire here and a radio and a main charge of a artillery shell and maybe some sort of arming switch or something else that goes into that. It's improvised because it's just made for that one attack. IEDs are a very, very particular solution to a problem that the insurgents in Iraq and Afghanistan had, which is that they did not have their own military equipment to challenge the U.S. military. There was an occupation. There was U.S. military on the road running around. It was hard for them to target in the bases. It's hard for them to shoot down aircraft. But there was a weak spot that was being exploited, and that is these vehicles physically rolling down the road. It's another reason IEDs became so popular, is that consumer electronics with wireless technology exploded at the same time that these wars are really getting going. And so there are just more and more things you can buy off the shelf where I push a button here and something happens over there. And so then I can modify the thing happening over there to, instead of a beep going off or a noise or whatever the case may be, I can modify that to now a device is going off. And as the wars went on, the job got a lot more dangerous because the bombers or the emplacers, the people building the devices and putting them in, they were often placing secondary and tertiary devices that were meant to target the people coming to clear the first device. They had been watching for long enough that they knew our trends, even as we tried to mix them up and do different things. We were always changing up what we would do, but the bomber was changing that fast as well. And so my number one concern when arriving on scene was not the package that was called in. That's easy. I know where that is. My number one job was making myself safe and my team safe and our security escort safe and the people that lived in the area safe immediately upon arriving on scene, because you just had to assume that there was a bomb somewhere at your feet that you had not found yet. Really, our job at the end of the day is to take apart every device. It didn't matter who it was targeting. It was a car bomb at a school. It was a car bomb at a daycare. We took apart a number of those. At a certain point, you're just trying to make everyone safe. And so yes, that particular roadside bomb was meant to target a US convoy. True. However, it was just as likely to hit a civilian truck that happened to be driving by trying to take melons to market. And I think that there's understanding that mental aspect is important even when you're out operating every day in combat, because this may sound funny, it's easy to get complacent. Well, yeah, there's probably an IED out here, whatever. You are constantly mentally battling, staying on the edge. There's a reason that we pull up. We check, we do what's called 5 and 25. You check within 5 meters of your vehicle. You check within 25 meters of your vehicle. You get the robot. You go through these steps. You don't want to be rote. You don't want to just be formulaic and do the same thing every time. You don't want to do everything the same way. They're going to be watching. They're going to change something. That's going to get you killed. So something I learned in school is to visualize. And this is something that pro athletes do. Olympians and people that are really operating at a high level. And it's something I learned from one of the instructors. You would visualize the night before what you're going to do the next day. The tools that we relied on, first and foremost, was the robot. The robot is there to physically walk up to the thing, take it apart, use the gripper, do the stuff that you can't do in a safe way. We use a lot of other tools. We use jammers to try to keep the bomber from being able to blow it up remotely. Something that may be surprising is that the best way to take apart an explosive device without it going off is to use explosives yourself, to use an energetic tool, we would call it, to try to get it to disassemble without detonating. So sometimes those explosive tools are carried down by the robot. You put it in the gripper and it drives down and it's putting it near the device, and then we can set it off from a long distance. In the typical operation from Iraq, your robot is checking out, doing a recon, seeing what's needed, coming back, picking up a tool and dropping it in a certain place to get the effect you want. The first thing you do is you send in a robot, and if your robot blows up, send in another robot, and if that robot blows up, I will drive you a third robot before a person walks down. Because if you thought about it, losing a $250,000 robot is way, way better than losing a person. Sometimes you're walking around and you stumble upon the thing and you realize that there's a device at your feet and you need to take an action immediately right then to save your own life. But to be 100 yards away and say a person needs to go and do this thing, that is the gravest decision. Walking down yourself is pretty lonely. It's called the long walk for a reason. In that moment, the thing that lets you do that is a certain confidence, which is born of your training and your skills and your knowledge and the belief that you're doing the safest possible thing in that moment. We've lost a lot of men and women that way. I mean, we didn't lose those people because they were making an offhanded, cavalier choice. We lost them because it was still the safest thing to do, and it still got them killed. As the war went on, I mean, people just got sick of getting blown up all the time. And at a certain point, you say, we just need to stop this. You can only have your convoy blown up every day for so long before you say, we should really catch the person who's doing this. When I was first at Balad on my first tour, I remember being asked to go and do a post-blast investigation, first week there. And our answer was, what's that? And we drove out there and we looked at the hole and we said, yep, something went off there. And what do you want us to do? We just didn't have the capacity at that time. And then gradually you build these task forces. We had weapons intelligence teams. We had a unit called SEXI, the Combined Explosive Exploitation Cell in Baghdad. You had FBI labs. You had all of this stuff and this infrastructure to do the real forensic analysis on exactly how they were made, what's their capability, what can they do, where do they come from, and not just from a detailed technical standpoint, but from an emotional standpoint. How do human beings work? How do they tend to enter a room, leave a room? Do you leave a car running? Do you these little bits of human behavior and how that would figure into a scene? Understanding those motivations and recreating that scene, that is really that's the heart of the work. One of my first incidents at Kirkuk, we had explosively formed penetrators. So these are an Iranian provided weapon that are made to basically punch through armor. And they were relatively rare at the time. They got more and more common through 2007. And if we had found those a year before, we probably would have blown them up. And this time we saved them and we packed them in a crate. And I got on a helicopter to Baghdad the next day to specifically deliver these things, to do the real forensic analysis, everything down to the little rivets and the little caps, to be like, oh yeah, we've seen this rivet before. That's not something we knew how to do at the beginning of the war. And it's only something we learned over the course of it. So my job as the commander is obviously to keep all my team safe. organize and lead and provide them the equipment that they need to work. We never lost anyone on my tours. I'm proud of that. At the same time, the people that we, lost in the EOD family generally, that doesn't mean that any of those folks did anything wrong. Luck is a massive part of this. We had a saying that you need 5 things to get through Iraq: luck, training, luck, equipment, and luck. And I would always rather be lucky than good. You can't do the work if you're not just physically safe, but have the feeling of it. You can't control the fact that you're in Iraq. You can't control the fact that the U.S. is fighting a war in Iraq. You can't control your assignment. There are so many things outside of your control. And so you have to come to peace with that and focus on the things that you can. I think there's 2 main sets of character traits for the kind of person that goes into EOD. One of it is a combination of mental acuity and physical handiness. It's like being a surgeon, except if you fail, then you die and not the patient. And the kind of person that gets into that has to be book smart, has to do math, has to understand physics, has to be really analytical and attention to detail. The other part of it, though, is just there's a certain attitude or a certain smartassery, if I can call it that. So I got an electrical engineering degree. I was not a great engineer. When you're an engineer, you see like your alarm clock and you're really curious how it works. And so you take it apart and then you put it back together. The EOD tech sees the alarm clock, takes it all apart, maybe with a hammer, and then can't be bothered to put it back together. And that's much more me. So I did Air Force ROTC. I got a scholarship when I was 17 to go to college at Marquet and get an electrical engineering degree, and the Air Force paid for it. It was a very different world. When I actually graduated college, joined the military in 2000 again, I was interested in EOD. So I got to EOD school in February of 2003. So the invasion of Afghanistan had already happened, and Iraq was coming quickly, and we knew it was coming. And my eyes were wide open that I was not joining a profession that would be sleepy and I would just do my time in the military and move on. I knew that I was going into something where combat was coming quickly because of the training. In EOD, everybody attends the same school. So it's Navy School Explosive Ordnance Disposal at Eglin Air Force Base, which is Fort Walton Beach, Destin area in the Panhandle of Florida. And that school takes 7 to 12 months, depending, and it all happens right there. Yeah, the hardest part of EOD school is the pace. The first day you basically do all of physics, and then you take a test the next day. And then the next day, you do all of math, and you take a test the next day. Just the pace, it is relentless. Then the next section is demolitions, and you start working with explosives very, very quickly. And that's because the school needs to figure out if you're going to freak out or not. And there are some people that the first time they pick up a blasting cap, they can't touch it. Or the feeling of putting a bunch of C4 together and putting it on a pile of bombs and landmines or what else you're getting rid of, like you are standing on top of your own death. And some people just, the feeling of that is like too much, and you're like, I'm done. I'm out of here. It's DOR, drop on request. Like you have to be a volunteer to do EOD. Like if it's not right for you, you should not be in it. So you need an 85% on your test to pass. And a lot of the questions or a lot of the things you might do in a physical test are worth 16 points. So you do this one thing, you fail. And that reflects really the nature of the work. You do any one of these things and it's going to kill you in real life. In our class specifically, 30 of us started together and 3 of us finished. No matter what basic things you learn in EOD school, there is no preparation for the bomber who is building devices in your neighborhood and is putting them out on the street corner at the first time you drive down the road. And there's no way to prepare for that because that particular bomber is also changing most likely his designs all the time. After I got out of the military, I became a contractor, I became a journalist, I was covering war in a different way. So I joined Amnesty in 2018, March of 2018. I was initially hired as the weapons investigator and as a military analyst. We're a watchdog because the work that we're doing is trying to keep as many civilians safe and free of harm as possible. The risks to being an investigator with Amnesty in a conflict area is very different than when you're in the military. Being in the military and being in an armored vehicle and being in uniform obviously makes you a target, but you also have the entire US military behind you if you're being attacked and something happens. It's almost exactly the inverse as an investigator with Amnesty, where you are there with very little support except your own wits, a little bit of money, your friends and network, and your ability to blend in and your ability to essentially not get noticed to the maximum extent possible. The biggest risks then change. They are kidnapping. They are normal banditry in some places. They are being in the wrong place at the wrong time. If you are drawing attention to yourself, you are making yourself a target. You need a reason for no one to notice you. And so I try to do things so I am, yes, always blending in. So I arrived in Kabul in July of 2021. And the reason that I and my colleague went is because the Taliban were winning. And as they were winning, there were a number of violations and crimes, was our understanding, that were happening in the course of that. People caught in the crossfire between the Taliban and the Afghan National Army, people that died in US airstrikes that had occurred recently, and then crimes committed by the Taliban. There were a number of massacres, targeted killings, executions. And so we were documenting that, and we were planning on leaving. Except every day the Taliban were getting closer and provincial capitals started to fall. We tried to leave and we couldn't. We had tickets to leave Kabul the day after Kabul ended up falling. So that morning, the 15th of August, we had a plan. We had tickets to fly out the next day. Our plan was to essentially hope that the Afghan National Army would hold Kabul for some amount of time, and that essentially we were going to go to the airport as early as possible, essentially the night before, and then stay overnight at the airport and fly out early the next day. The US had announced that they were sending troops to hold the airport. No one had a better option. And so that morning, the 15th, we're packed up, we're ready to go. We're planning to leave later that day, and then there's gunshots immediately outside our compound, steps away from our compound. The hotel staff run out armed. Everybody heads to a safe room, and basically all the plans changed immediately, which was, we're not going to the airport tonight. We are going to the airport right this second. We got out of the safe room. We got in a car. We drove the back roads. Main highways through Kabul are absolutely packed. The Afghan National Army had essentially disappeared. The Afghan police had disappeared. You could see uniforms just left on the side of the road. It's kind of every person for themselves at that point. We got to the airport that night or that evening before dark, and there was absolutely a feeling like, okay, we're here. We don't see the Americans, but they're here somewhere. The US has promised that they are setting up a secure area here. We're good now. And, we waited and we had a plan to sleep and stay overnight, and we did our check-ins and whatever else. And then after dark, we noticed that people in the concourse start moving kind of closer into the main part of the international airport. We would learn later, there's two sides to the Kabul airport. There's a civilian side in the south and a military side up in the north. Early evening, we get word, there's rumors spread extremely fast, that the Taliban had entered the airport. Basically, all of the security disappeared. If you can imagine, like, the outside of the Kabul airport in some ways at the time, looked like any other airport. Like, you had to go through a metal detector. Like, you had to go through the equivalent of TSA to get inside. There's still, like, people checking passports. There's still people working at the front desk, right, of the various airlines. And then imagine like walking back out through the hallway and like everybody's gone. Like every security official is gone. And it essentially turned into a free-for-all. It was pretty clear that the flights the next day were not happening. You know, just the rumor of the Taliban entering was enough to like basically sow this chaos. And so me and my colleague, we're grabbing our stuff and we're essentially out on the tarmac. We're out on, you know, where planes are parked. People are trying to rush to get onto aircraft, civilian aircraft that are sitting there. There's some armed guards that are pushing people out. It's completely dark. I have a friend who's a journalist who has made it to the military side. He's like, you need to get over here. And I'm looking across and I can see the tails of the C-17s, the American C-17s. And he's like, which side are you on? I'm like, I'm on the civilian side. He's like, you need to be over here. And so me and my Amnesty colleague, we ran across the runway and we're, you know, moving across and we're in the grass and then we're like on a parking apron and then we're in the grass again. And all of a sudden, you know, these lights pop on and it's like, it's an American armored vehicle. And I do one of these things, like holding my passport. And the guy I'm with does one of these things, holding the passport. And, you know, we're just lucky we didn't get shot, essentially. And so we get picked up by the Americans, and they basically said, what in the hell are you doing here? And we said, the Taliban are in the civilian side of the airport. And they said, what are you talking about? More and more people started to come to, then it was like hundreds of people crossing the airfield. And these are the videos that you saw. We ended up having to go and essentially getting ourselves rearrested, so to speak, like, you know, pick us up and, you know, eventually got on military flights out of Kabul. We published that report in December, several months later. And we included essentially everything that we were able to prove up until the fall of Kabul, including U.S. drone strike on a car in a Kabul neighborhood that the U.S. thought was a car bomb and was not. And they killed a number of people. Many, many civilians died in the course of the fighting over that summer up until the day that Kabul fell. I and a small team, we entered Ukraine a few days after the war started. In February of 2022 is when the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. And we set up in Lviv, which is in far western Ukraine. And the reason we set up there is because we simply didn't know how far and how fast the Russians were going to get in from the eastern border. So we set up in Lviv and we were interviewing people that had fled from the east. We were the first to prove to have physical evidence of the use of cluster munitions. Cluster munitions being, you know, weapons that disperse these small submunitions over a wide area. They're banned under international law for a number of reasons. Cluster munitions are a category of weapons that's deployed in two stages. You have a carrier, and that carrier could be a missile, could be a bomb, clamshell bomb, it could be an artillery round or something else. But it's fired into an area, and then that carrier opens, and it spreads many, many submunitions, bomblets, cluster munitions over a wide area. And depending on the type, this can be an area the size of a football field or even larger. You can't aim where all these little bomblets are going. So by their nature, they might hit a military target. They might hit civilians that are nearby because they're just randomly falling wherever the air takes them. They also tend to have a high dud rate. And by that, I mean some of them detonate, but some of them don't. And what that means is, you know, 200 of these fall in an area. Maybe only 80% of them detonate, 90%. That could be 20 or 40 submunitions that are just sitting there with sensitive fuses that really might detonate if you kick them, if you pick them up, if you accidentally brush by one. The fuses are extremely dangerous. And so there's a convention against the use, stockpile, manufacture of cluster munitions. And unfortunately, the United States, for example, is not a state party. So we had kind of rented a flat in one of the neighborhoods downtown, and we're interviewing people in the flat, and he pulls out a piece of the frag that a surgeon had pulled out of him. And I'm taking photographs with a little ruler or whatever else to prove that those were 9N235 or 9N210 submunitions. We're trying to gather that physical evidence and the testimony and where were you, and trying to build that case that yes, on this particular day, at this particular time, this weapon was used in this place, killed or injured this civilian. That's the heart of the work. So to identify weapons, we're looking for pieces that have what we call key ID features. And what that means is what is on this weapon that is on no other weapon. So we have what's called an ordnance order of battle, and that's a military term that basically says what are all the weapons that are being used in this conflict and what are their sources. When I was in Mykolaiv in July of 2022, at that point, Russia still was occupying Kherson, and the front was between Mykolaiv and Kherson, and it was an extremely active front. So there were many evenings or nights where you would hear an explosion or two that would interrupt your sleep, and that was normal. But there was one particular night where it got to be early in the morning, 4 or 5 in the morning, I don't remember exactly when, where there was a detonation that was way, way, way too close. And of course, you shoot straight out of bed and you're looking for the bomb shelters. There were a couple more impacts. And then of course, first thing in the morning, as soon as it's light, we're out to try to figure out what had happened, because again, that was way too close. Those 220 millimeter rockets had dropped cluster munitions, but it was only a couple hundred meters away from our hotel. There was a hospital complex that was nearby. So we essentially spent the morning identifying craters. In these particular submunitions, they splash is what it looks like. There's like a shallow crater and then a ring of fragmentary divots, if it hits asphalt or concrete, especially. Some of them are duds. And so we're taking photos of the duds. Some of them are, had detonated. They had detonated on the hospital grounds. We are collecting evidence to hopefully guide international justice later. But, when I find a piece of frag that, that was used when I'm out digging in a hole and I pull up one of those pieces of Blue Arrow 7 frag, I don't take it home as a war souvenir. I dig it out of the hole, I identify it, and I leave it for others. The only way you're going to find out what happened is by talking to people. If you can build some rapport and some trust, people will tell you things that we never would have known when I was in the military. For all of the fancy intel streams that the US government has, I don't know a substitute for speaking to the person that lived next door. The Mariupol theater bombing is an excellent example of how challenging this work is. So in March of 2022, the Russians attacked the drama theater in central Mariupol. This was like a major opera house, a major cultural landmark in the very center of the city. And that theater, because of the sturdiness of its construction, had served as a shelter for people that were trying to flee fighting in other parts of the city. And the Russians struck it with 1 or 2 very large aircraft bombs and killed a number of people there. We spoke to dozens of people that were there, had been there, had family members there, had been there themselves at the time of the strike. There were a lot of conspiracy theories. The Russians were saying, it was a false flag. The Ukrainians put a device inside their own building. And so the challenge was to find people from Mariupol. We can't get to Mariupol itself. It's being attacked. Find people that had been at the theater. Find people that had been at the theater when it was struck. And then people that could actually name victims that they know their family member was killed. The things that we had to do, we we found the plans, the original architectural plans for the theater through a number of sources. And then we have these plans in front of us so we can get on the phone with people and talk for hours and say, okay, what room were you in? In the end, we were only able to find the names for very few, a handful. And we were able to prove at least a dozen people were killed. People might be surprised to know that most human rights violations, most civilian deaths, most of the horror and tragedy that comes through conflict is not with fancy weapons. It is with old-fashioned rifles that have been around for decades. And the way the world is awash in weapons, it's just more and more possible or feasible that these legacy weapons continue to cause harm. The US has been cleaning out stockpiles of weapons that I didn't even think were still in the inventory anymore. Old Hawk, surface-to-air missile systems that the US had decommissioned long ago, Ukraine is using to shoot down Shahed drones right now.
Do you feel like there is a weapon today or could be in the future that might have a similar level of efficacy in warfare similar to the IED had in Iraq and Afghanistan?
I think the best analogy for the IED and a certain weapon being used in context, I think the analogy is the FPV drone in Ukraine. And the question is whether FPV drones, as used currently, is the future of warfare, or if it is a context-specific weapon. My personal view is that it is tailor-made. And that FPV drone, the reason it is so expansively used by both sides is because there's a long front line, there's a shortage of infantry, there's a shortage of artillery, and there's an ability to make these weapons locally in a way and quickly and scale that up in a way that it's very difficult to scale up artillery, armor, training more infantry, etc. Some of these things that are tailor-made, they really do change the nature of war. Machine guns were a novelty until World War I, and then they completely changed the nature of war. So it's hard to tell if FPV drones are machine guns that absolutely change how war is conducted, or if it's really a one-off. So investigating U.S. airstrikes in Somalia was my first case, my first investigation at Amnesty. And so it is quite a way to start, to having been a member of the U.S. military and then investigating the U.S. military. One of the most frustrating things dealing with the U.S. military is just getting them to admit they did the thing that you proved that they did. We had an initial report with a number of cases where the U.S. military denied every single one. And then over several years after that, we documented more and more cases. And it was only one of the last ones at the very end that the U.S. said, actually, you're right. We did kill that woman in her home with a drone strike, and we shouldn't have done that. Congress has set aside money to essentially provide what the U.S. calls ex gratia payments. In international law, we would call them reparations or something else. It's a tangible way for the U.S. military to say, we did this, we shouldn't have, we acknowledge that your family member was killed. The reason to have reparations is rarely because the payment itself, obviously it doesn't replace a child. The payment doesn't fix everything about their life. The reparations are a sign that a country, a military has acknowledged harm in a way beyond mere words. It is more than a token. It is more than a press release. And I have found that families have found closure when you do get all the way through that process. Actually getting the U.S. military to go through the whole process and actually get the money to these families is excruciating. And in many cases, we still haven't. I personally find a lot of meaning in being able to say to a family, we believe you and we can prove it. And we're going to. But that's only part of it. Nothing returns a child, but forcing an organization to say, yes, we really did that, especially when they've been denying it for how many years ahead of time. It's like the circle isn't complete until there is some tangible, real transfer that means something. Not that it fixes the problem.
Hi, I'm a producer and authorised account. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and comment with more topics that you'd like us to cover in this series.